Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Scrutiny Committee of Basingstoke-Dean. I must give you the fire evacuation procedures. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if a fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear and side of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the Moore Memorial Park. Please note that this meeting is being webcast live on the internet, and if you're sitting in the front row of the public seats, you will be seen on the screen. Will everybody please switch their phones off or turn them to silent? Right, we have an agenda which I've modified at fairly short notice. Are there any apologies for absence or substitutions for this meeting?
I'm substituting for Councillor David Leakes.
Okay. Any others? No. As Councillor Leakes isn't here, I'd like to propose that Councillor Elaine still sit in as Vice Chairman. Is that agreed? I think I heard a loud acclamation saying yes and one no. Yes, if you like, we will have a vote. Those in favour of Councillor Still as Vice Chairman for the evening, please. And those against. There being one against, that's overwhelmingly carried. If it's going to go on like this, you made that point before quite correctly, Sean, but this time I did propose it and ask for agreement. Wait till the next call in and see what they do then. Are there any declarations of interest in the matters on the agenda tonight? Yes, Councillor Golding.
Two things, Chair. Firstly, I am the Council's representative on the Board of Sentinel, who get a lot of mentions in here, but I'm only an observer and it's an unpaid position, so that doesn't prevent me from taking part in the debates, but I thought I'd put that on the record. Secondly, there are a number of reports in this pack of papers we've got where I was either the portfolio holder or a cabinet member. If we're just using them as background, that's not a problem. If we ever get into scrutinising an actual decision in which I took part, I shall leave at that point and hope someone will come and get me back when we've moved on.
Thank you for that. Any other declarations? The Councillor, Mrs. Cubitt.
Sorry, can I just a question, just point of clarification?
Yes.
Given that some of the papers are quite pivotal in which Councillor Golding made a decision as cabinet member, instead of him declaring a conflict and walking out, might it not be more useful for our scrutiny committee if he remained here so we could ask him questions? Because I really believe it would be far more useful to him to be in the room than out of the room, and the conflict is not the normal conflict, as it were, because we're not questioning the decision, we're scrutinising the evolution of affordable housing for the past 4 or 5 years.
This is not a decision-making committee, so I'm inclined to that view. But on the other hand, we'll have to consider that if there are any proposals for us to make recommendations. Could I have views of members, please? I think it's in the best interest of the council that Councillor Golding should stay with us. Councillor Keating.
Unfortunately, I believe that we cannot decide if he has a vested interest or an interest to declare. He has to do that himself, and only he can do that. Thank you.
I think he's made his position clear, and he will make it clear, presumably, if such an occasion arises. Okay. Councillor Mrs. Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not quite sure whether this is completely necessary, as I'm visiting rather than a member of the committee, but just for completeness, I am a landlord, so if we went into sort of detailed technical discussion on landlords, then just to be aware that I am.
Yes, well, I sort of invited Mrs. Reid to be here because I think that'll help us as well. And I don't think it's really in any of our interests if some of the people who've got knowledge have to run away. So thank you. I haven't been notified of any urgent matters. We have the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of September. Has everybody got these? Are any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? In that case, I shall sign a copy as a true record of that meeting. Now, I wrote to all members to let you know that after the briefing meeting that I had with officers and with Councillor Keating in attendance, I decided that we were not ready to conduct a scrutiny meeting with visiting speakers, witnesses, or advisors. And as a result, we will be conducting a scrutiny of internal matters in the council. I believe that we haven't got enough information or indeed understanding of some of these things to go for the full programme of scrutiny. And for example, the item 5, which we're now on, the scope makes reference to improving relations. And I think we need to go a little bit farther down the track before we've ascertained that there's something that needs improving. So that's the basis of what we're going to be doing tonight of both items 5 and 6. And I hope it will be useful, and I hope we will all go away enlightened, and either directly ourselves or through the relevant overview and scrutiny committee, move things forward from here. I've been told that Councillor Tilbury would like to speak on, oh sorry, that's on item 6, I believe, Ian, is that right? Want to speak on item 6? Okay, well, as you, the members know, I thought that this was going to be a crushed meeting because of the volume of stuff on the agenda, and only one member replied, giving me notice of questions, and that was after we'd had the briefing meeting. So now it's ad lib. I think I'm very grateful to the people who brought forward the registered social landlord item onto this agenda. It's very vital to many of us, and until we got this pack, I didn't realise how many housing associations there are serving Basingstoke and Dean. But there are some that are very much key because of the sheer scale and the relationship we have here. And I want us to plan very carefully how we approach talking to those very significant social landlords rather than go into it without an adequate plan. I would like to thank the officers for putting together the packs of paper that we have got, and quite enlightening in themselves. In this case, I think we're really into questions. And can I ask if the people who put forward this item for the agenda have any opening questions? Or yes, Paul.
Pardon my ignorance, but who put forward that? It doesn't say where these items came from on the agenda. It would be very helpful to know where they originated.
Well, I'm not sure if it's necessary because they came from this committee, having been submitted to this committee, I think. But we have a scoping document there. But it went into there from this committee. In fact, I see Paul Harvey.
Thank you, Chair.
Do you wish to kick us off?
At least pick up where Councillor Miller has just left off. I mean, thank you for the officer's report, and thank you for the work that's gone into preparing it. And in fact, on both, because they're both of substantial sets of papers, to say the least. I think the first thing that I was slightly confused over was at the last meeting, we'd put the RSL issue back to March on the basis of taking the public transport issue from March to January. So I was surprised to see this on this particular agenda on the basis of what we'd agreed at the last meeting. But understanding that it is on the agenda, one of the things that we could do, and in terms of talking to the officers, that's all well and good, but one of the main purposes was to actually understand some of the issues associated with the RSLs themselves, and the scoping report speaks for itself, and the officers have written it up exactly as the scoping group discussed the matter. That's there on paper. I think the issue really is what as a committee do we want to do with this, and how would we like to investigate these issues, which, as you say, are rightly significant to a significant number of our residents. Where do we go from there? Answers on the back of a postcard, please. I think is really the point I'd like to start with, Chair, is to make an open comment.
Yes, incidentally, the agenda as it came to me had just one housing association representative here, and certainly I didn't want the reference to improving relations and the identity of a particular housing association to be misunderstood in that case. I have some questions. If the gentlemen down there don't want to kick off. I understand that the relationship with the social landlords is much more than housing. I wonder if the officers, individually or collectively, could give us an appraisal of the different contact points between Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council and the leading housing associations.
I think it depends on the issue that's under consideration, whether it's a development matter, whether it's a housing management matter, whether it's a regeneration matter. It can very much depend estates management, estates maintenance, and obviously with 30 different housing associations, that could be 30 different contacts for each of those. So it really depends on what the issue is under consideration, and then at what level, whether it's strategic, whether it's at director, corporate director, or at an operational level. So it could be anything.
You answered my question by listing the options there. For the benefit of all of us, we are not just talking about a relationship with housing associations who are dealing with tenants, which I think for those of us who are elected members is the way things come to us most of the time, and it's a lot more complicated than that. Also cutting the grass, I suppose. That's how I wanted to begin our investigation. Paul.
I'd like to take what it says on the agenda in item 5, of what the Scrutiny Committee are being asked to undertake a review into how the relationships between the council residents, we've read it, but it's the words that I'm kind of focusing on, could be improved. What's wrong is my question. That's my question to officers. What's wrong that we can consider that needs to be improved? That, as a committee member, is something that I would like to understand.
I think that's for you to tell us. I'm not sure what's wrong. I'm not sure what particular area of activity, and if we were, then obviously we could direct answers towards that. So if there is a particular action, inaction, or issue, then we can advise further. But so far, the remit has been quite broad, hence the sort of broad nature of the response.
Sorry, Paul.
Then I think that probably we've got to start somewhere, but I'd like to be able to focus. I quite agree with you, Chair. What you've said is something that I've said it in other fora, that there are so many strands to housing, and I think I've expressed this to officers as well. I think what the committee has always got to do is be able to focus on a particular issue. It will be connected to all the other strands. I've got no issue with that at all. But what I like to see is what is broken, bruised, or whatever, and I will dive in there with relish to see how we can improve it, because it's absolutely vital we get the best relationship going between the council at all levels, members, officers, you name it, and the RSLs, because that can only provide the best service to our residents and the people who are in need.
Kevin?
Thank you, and it probably builds on what Councillor Miller's just said in terms of what are the issues. And I think one of the issues that certainly was debated back in Housing Environment last year sometime was talk of us no longer having a role as observers on the sort of many housing association committees. And obviously we've gone from having council houses where we're running them to being very having a substantial role on the boards of these housing associations, to being observers on these housing associations. And obviously we know there's a long-term view that we shouldn't be taking that role even. And with registered social landlords, the problem we have is, or certainly I'm speaking from personal experience, helping a resident out with service charges, where effectively, and I'll bore you with a long story, they were charged a maintenance fee of a hideous amount of money. And when we looked at the estate broadly, we couldn't work out why this fee was so great for what appeared to be we'd never seen the maintenance team. I contacted the manager who looked after the estate. She turned up. She got very defensive, assuring me the work was done. I got hold of the contractor who has the contract. I met with them. I got them to show me the work they do. I asked them questions about lots of hedges that had never been cut, and they said, I didn't realise this was part of the work we do. I can't work that out. Bear in mind, they must have bid for the contract and got the contract and must have known what they had to do, but they said loads of hedges they didn't know were even part of their realm. As I went through a list of tasks that should be undertaken, they turned around and said, yeah, we do that, and there's things in there like maintaining outdoor taps. There aren't any. We clean windows in communal areas. There's no communal areas with windows. And so they said they did most of the work, but some of the bits didn't exist. And then I said, well, unfortunately, the list I've just read you is actually the caretakers list, because they have a caretaker as well. And you're telling me you're doing all the jobs that can be done, but the residents are paying for a caretaker as well. I spoke to the housing manager saying this is ridiculous. You're charging people for a maintenance fee and for a caretaker, both of which are completely out of whack. You don't need both. I was quite happy to take the contract myself, because one Saturday a month I could have done all the work that was needed and I wouldn't be charging something like 18 grand a year. Didn't get the job, unfortunately. So when I spoke to the housing manager, she got very defensive, very grumpy, and resigned, which wasn't really the outcome I was looking for. And unfortunately, the resident who was really driving it decided to get a transfer. Now, we had another resident who, when the service charges went up, we went and approached the housing where you go for rent appeals. They come down, they meet you in a hotel, and you have a committee, and you sit down. It's like a little mini courtroom. And we went through that, and we checked all the legislation, and the RSL couldn't even be bothered to turn up for that hearing. They didn't have to turn up because they know the legislation. The legislation says it can only deal with rent, and let's face it, RSLs are never going to be charging so much rent that it's going to cause a problem in terms of what's a fair rent. So the resident had actually no recourse. There was no higher body or higher authority apart from me being grumpy and jumping up and down. So the RSLs don't seem to answer to anyone. They just flash a glossy leaflet out once a year saying, look, 90% of our residents are really happy. That's the 90% in London. The 10% in Basingstoke don't really matter. It's a minor part of their work. And residents seem to have nowhere to go to get sort of a fair deal or challenge the deal they get from RSLs. And RSLs don't care because they're not that bothered. Certainly this was one of the smaller RSLs, but they're not particularly bothered because it's a small part of their business. And what are people going to do? Move? So what? There's a big waiting list of people we can move in. So where is the public scrutiny? It's not fair to expect residents to fill out complaint forms that may or may not be ignored and do all these things on their own. There needs to be some sort of public scrutiny of landlords, or some expectation of what landlords will do and how they will justify what they're doing to us as elected representatives. That forum doesn't exist. And I think there'd be a benefit from having some forum where we can hold what are effectively non-for-profit organisations with a huge housing stock, looking after a large percentage of our residents. In certain wards, I think you probably find that the housing associations are almost a bigger landowner than the council or private tenants. And yet we seem to have no way, apart from very nicely trying to encourage them to do the right thing, And certainly within this document, there are a number of things that we should be looking at. And I think the starting point is that's what's wrong. Residents come to a councillor, they expect the councillor to be able to do something, and actually we can't apart from follow their own complaints procedure.
I'd like to pick two things out of that. One of them is you said the tenant has no resort. I can't remember the word you used. No resort. That doesn't it feeds into the issue of tenancy agreements, because if the tenant was to have any resort, that would be written into the agreement, wouldn't it?
There are some landlord obligations enshrined within tenancy agreements. The issue of sort of service charges is more a sort of separate contractual element. There is housing ombudsman, housing association ombudsman. Was that not sort of covered in any sense? Right. Okay. I mean, you know, it's very difficult to see what you would want in place to be able to deal with that, given that that was a small association, presumably part of a national organisation. Whereas if it was possibly one of our more locally present housing associations, I would suggest that we probably get a more responsive return from them. But that is the issue when you're dealing with 30 odd housing associations, all in different stages in their organisational development, if you like. Where can you go? But what would you put in place to make any difference to that? I'm not sure I know the answer to that, but
can I just follow up the second point? Does the council have any power or authority to do anything about the sort of event that is quite common?
difficult without knowing the details of the case, really, and in terms of whether or not there appear to be a breach of contract. Certainly we've used our legal department to get us an expert view on things that are outside of our expertise, and we can advise sometimes then. Most of our powers and duties tend to be in relation to repairing properties and all landlords' obligations to repair properties, and that's where we tend to invoke statutory powers. But you know, again, it depends on the circumstances of the case.
Councillor Regan, sorry.
Thank you. I touching upon what Councillor Gavin James has said. I mean, just to go back, when I was in the late 90s, I was on the board of Kingfisher when councillors had representation after transfer for the first 10 years. And they used to take note of us. And when I left at council in 2004, they still were taking note of us. But when I come back 2012, my local house association, Kingfisher, had been swallowed up by Sovereign from Newbury. And lo and behold, they don't think we're relevant. They see no role for the elected representative of the community being an advocate for their tenants. You have to constant fight and bang on doors, emails and phone calls to get them to take any notice of you. We do now have 3 monthly meetings with them, but that's only nothing. But in between that, we have to constantly fight all the time. So the challenge is for us is to get them to see us as local representatives. Bearing in mind something like Sean and I represent Southam, which is 60% of our electorate live in sovereign housing. So it's a constant thing for us: repairs, transfers, etc., and social behaviour, and to get them to officers to take note. And they keep changing their officers all the time. They're a bit stable at the moment, but when I first got elected in 2012, re-elected, there was a constant turnover of surveyors. That's for the repairs. And then they have I've got one at the moment that covers all of North Hampshire and a bit of Berkshire. So that's not a service. So, and actually trying to get them to take note that we represent the community, that is the real challenge. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. I think there you are hitting at the point of what can be improved. Officers, reading some of the information we have here, the HCA document that we have in our bundle does say that councillors have a role in ensuring RSLs meet consumer standards. That's on page 53 of our pack, or page 6 of the original document. So, well, I was waiting for you to find the page and confirm that it does say that, because I was going to ask you if you agree with that, and how should we exercise that role if we have got it.
If you go on to read the rest of that section there, it says through bodies such as tenant panels. Sovereign do have a tenant panel which members are at liberty to attend.
Sorry, I didn't know that. We as councillors can attend the tenant panels.
If it's helpful, members actually agreed to relinquish their standing rights at Sovereign Board. It was a paper a few years ago when they changed their governance structure and introduced tenant panels. And members can go along to those tenant panels. They even have regional panels as well.
Is there a document available to all councillors how we exercise that? I suppose there's one per housing association, is there?
Each association would be different. Sovereign definitely have a tenant panel. Sentinel don't have that arrangement. They have a different arrangement, and currently we still have an observer board member, as Councillor Golding mentioned earlier. So it's a different arrangement there. I don't know what the arrangements are for the other 28.
Okay, well, each onto our own. I've only got 3 to deal with. Say that this who does what has different flavours, and in my own ward, there's a piece of land that Sovereign have maintained, or Kingfisher, ever since they took over. And now this year it hasn't been touched at all. I've actually asked the land registry, and I've got a copy of the plan, and it shows they don't own the land. I think we do, which I'm glad to see Richard here. We'll be hearing from me on that one.
I don't know whether it's because I'm not being very intelligent tonight, but I'm slightly confused as to where the conversation is going. I thought we were scrutinising the agenda number 5 in the registered social landlord scrutiny review, and somebody asked what we should be doing today, and on page 9, somebody, I don't know who drafted it, talks about programme objectives. And I'm just wondering, I mean, obviously it's not, I wasn't the initiator of this agenda point.
Can I answer that? That's the programme objectives for one of the commissioning outcome groups.
Yes. But so what I'd love, just because I didn't instigate this agenda item, but given that we're very privileged to have the portfolio holder here tonight and a previous portfolio holder, and given we've got these very good questions here, and given that we've been talking in generalities about registered social landlords, I suppose the key question is the portfolio holder happy that the council, with its partners, is providing adequate supply of housing? First question.
I think that's the next agenda item.
Well, it's in the registered social landlord review. Is it in the wrong pack?
The paper you're referring to is there, no doubt, to help us, but it's the programme objectives of the commissioning outcome group on homelessness, etc.
Well, then the second...
I realise the situation is unsatisfactory, Anneli, because we haven't got a proper plan for this evening, and that's my responsibility. But I wasn't prepared for us to go ahead with the representative of a single housing association there without us having had proper preparation and briefing as to what we're trying to do. And I think there's a lot in this pack, and we've got all this expertise on the bench with us.
Yes.
What I think we are scrutinising, in a sense, is our, as elected members, understanding of the relationship, so that we can go ahead and talk to the RSLs later.
Okay, but I suppose, okay, even if that commissioning paper should have probably been in the other folder for the agenda number 6, I suppose the point is, we have these registered social landlords. Are we content with the service that we are currently receiving for our residents in our borough? Does the portfolio holder believe that the service we are providing our tenants in this borough is up to scratch. That's the principal question, and then that follows on with secondaries, and that would seem sensible to me as a way to progress.
Are you happy to answer that?
Thank you. I think that's why I'm here, to listen to what members have to say about that relationship, and then to have a look at perhaps what we can do if there is a shortfall in that relationship, and in the service provided by the RSLs to tenants who are residents, then to have a look at perhaps how we can take that forward and what we can do to remedy that if there is a perceived problem with that. So that basically is why I'm here. It's to listen and to see what members have to say on that subject. Because I think I'm right in that that's what the scope of the evening is. It's to listen to members' questions and points, and then to see where we go from there. I don't know if that answers your question or not. But...
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to endorse and pick up really where Gavin left off in terms of his commentary on particular issues, and I think this might help us flesh out some of the concerns, if you like, that lead directly to what Donnelly is driving at. We've got 30 different relationships across the different RSLs, and I know our officers have got strong relationships with many of them, difficult relationships with some of them. We have officers in those organisations who are good, and we have officers in those organisations, as with anything, that you struggle with. And I think the issue that this was driving at, where we were coming at when we put this agenda item forward, was around the strategic issues, the bigger issues, because other committees are looking at the more detailed stuff. But that relationship revolves around housing management. It revolves around their responsibilities for neighbourhood management. It revolves around their issues of regeneration. These are the big ticket items. But what we're seeing in terms of the relationship in our wards, and I would describe this as interesting not just from the scale of the individual landlord, be it the small ones like Raglan or Radian or Swathling, or the medium-sized ones like Guinness, right the way up to the two biggies, in terms of Sovereign and Sentinel. They've each got their problems, they've each got their issues. But the way they're actually impacting on residents, and the way we've seen the impact on residents, is really what we want to drive at. And it isn't a criticism of our officers or of the portfolio holder or necessarily of those organisations. These are the issues that are presenting for tenants. And in that context, we've got issues that relate to sheltered housing, issues that relate to the blocks of social housing that still exist, as much as to individual social landlord, social housing, just one within a street, and the impact that has on residents. There's multiple layers to this. And I think us not having a role in the way we once did, I think the relationship there that we used to have around, for example, the preferred partner status that was linked to funding, that was linked in the way that it used to be. I think you've got the old housing partnership and the way that the relationships used to be explored and at least held to some level of account through getting them all sat round the table with the relevant multi-agency approach, which has evolved and changed, and it would be worth looking at that. And I think, it's all right to talk about the tenants panels, but one of the interesting things, I think, is how genuinely representative are they? Because Gavin's example is perfect. Where is the tenant panel supporting those residents' issues being floated up to the relevant decision makers in those RSLs? Because they're not. They're just not. They're not representative, genuinely, of the population of the broader tenants in the borough. Those bodies also direct policy. Where is policy in all of this as far as the RSLs are concerned? Because if, for example, Rob is our observer on Sentinel's board make huge decisions that reflect across the significant proportion of our town, and similarly for Sovereign and so on. Where's the council's relationship with that policy making that actually affects the kitchens, or affects the fact that, Guinness have got huge problems with damp in their properties across the huge number of properties in Brighton Hill, for example? Just two genuine examples of problems that I think residents are facing. But not wanting to get into the weeds of individual cases and not wanting to get into the weeds of neighbourhood management and just those individual, what are we as a council doing? Or what can we do? Which is genuinely not to criticise. So where does the relationship go from here to deal with the small ones who you just want to scream? And again, Swathling, during the Buckskin floods, I could have pulled my hair out with Swathling. I really could. I mean, they dropped the ball in such a big wave, and that was just for one or two people. Whereas Sovereign stepped up to the plate and really made a difference. Now, what is it between the two housing associations that leads you to such juxtaposed positions of the way they should be dealing and looking after their residents and tenants? And I'm not talking about the case, I'm talking about the implication of it in a broader sense for our responsibility. So that's really what we're driving at. Some of these RSLs talk no longer about tenants, they start talking about customers. They're not tenants anymore, they're customers. They're paying customers that they then deliver services to. They then say, well, we no longer have a responsibility to our neighbourhood or to the community because we're only interested in the tenants or the customers, as they now call them. We no longer have that broader social responsibility that we once had. That worries me. That disturbs me to see our RSLs moving in that direction. And then you have the issue over all of it of where a significant proportion of their money is being spent. These bodies have significant monies that could make or are able to make a significant difference to our areas, and then coordinate it with the way that you're doing. It's great. I mean, just in Normanton Road now, we're putting 50 grand into Regen. Sentinel are putting £80,000 in. Trying to coordinate that, shape that, and get that going so that they don't duplicate, they don't mess up, and we don't wind up doing work and then the other workers come along the week after and do. There's all those issues that are relevant to the relationships with our RSLs, and it isn't just your team; it's Tim's team as well. I do appreciate that in terms of the Regen and the rest of it. I know Richard's here to listen to this, so it's an overlapping issue. It isn't just one department of the council; it goes much broader than that. Just trying to unpack the thoughts in terms of what the issues we think residents are facing is really a part of this. It really is if we're going to direct a piece of work.
Thank you, Paul. I think one of the things we're here for is to find out to what extent we, the council, can do anything about it. I think we've been advised that we don't actually have any power. As individual councillors, we're told we can take part in tenants' panels. But perhaps if you can turn your head around a bit and think about what solutions we might investigate rather than continue to sob about the problem.
Thank you, Chair. I've got sort of three questions that build one on each other, so I'll try and ask them all and then ask officers for a response. The questions in the scoping template, the third bullet, say, what system of regulation exists for RSLs? I think we've got the answer to that in the HCA thing. Who holds them to account? Chair, you've already pointed out to the fact that the HCA thing says that elected councillors have a role, but that hasn't been spelled out. It goes on to say that there should be some DCLG guidance on how we can exercise that role. So first question is the council, has that guidance been published? Have we got it? And if so, can we have it? Because we ought to have it. And then it says, do best practice standards already exist? So that's a question I don't think has been answered in here, unless the absence of anything says that it's no. And then there was a question as to how the council, I think that was back to the HCA, how the council, and that means both the council as an organisation and individual councillors, can best relate to RSLs. And when, Chair, you opened your initial question and Kate listed all the different things, which rather avoided telling us how we could, sorry, not deliberately avoided, but it meant that you didn't actually answer the question how we could relate to any of them. Back to the specific question of individual tenants raising individual issues with councillors. Have we got any sort of a system which means that a councillor knows where to go within this organisation in order to be pointed to the right person in whichever housing association is his cousin? I mean, I'd know where to go with Sentinel and Sovereign, but for all the rest, do we have a proper process where we, the councillors, know who we come to get pointed in the right direction for all these housing associations? Thank you.
Are you happy to answer that?
I'll go first, and then I'm sure Kate will want to add something. I mean, that was one of the issues that came up at the scoping meeting. And as Kate's already said, it depends what the issue is as to who you'd need to contact to find the relevant corresponding contact in the association. So there isn't a simple one person in one organisation, one person in the other. It's not avoiding the issue. That's the reality of the situation.
I think the frameworks that are published by the HCA set out sort of a general expectation in terms of standards. Some associations will go beyond that. Some associations will just sort of float around on the cusp of that. But it's not a very detailed prescriptive list of what will and won't be done in certain circumstances. DCLG guidance, no. Our mission, if it's there, we clearly haven't got it to refer to, and we'll look for it.
Just supplementary, just to be quite clear, there are no generally recognised standards that RSLs are expected to follow in their relations with councils and councillors.
If we finish that exchange, Paul Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's coincidence, but let's build on what Rob Golding just said. I've got written down here, best practice for RSLs. Do they not also have a duty of care? Because any service provider, especially in this kind of environment, they must have a duty of care to the tenants. And I'm slightly surprised. I've got down here accountability, law, best practice, duty of care. Now, all those things come under the remit of what we're discussing here this evening. And, you know, it's two-sided. Within the RSL environment, there must be something written down that they can be held accountable to. If they're not, then that's an omission in law, I feel, because we're dealing with people here. We're not dealing with concrete. We are dealing with concrete and roof tiles, but it's the people that live in it. That's where I'm concerned. And also, it goes on our side as well. You know, we should have some kind of, and I heard the word protocol used a couple of minutes ago. That's exactly what should be put into place and agreed by any RSL within the borough, within any organisation. I don't care if the headquarters are in Liverpool, which I noted. And by the way, contact with an organisation, if there should be a contact with the council, I don't care about a person. I would go to, let's say I was an outsider, if I wanted to speak to somebody about housing, I go to the housing manager. I don't care who it is, but it's an appointment within the organisation who holds responsibility for whatever the subject is, whether it's, you know, fixing the toilets, fixing anything. There must be somebody accountable within the organisation. I think that's what we'd be looking for. But I think we're all struggling to understand, is there anything written down anywhere that you know, really holds, that we can hold their feet to the fire against? I think that's really what we're after.
I think that there's a regulatory framework. We've included that in the pack. That sets very high level standards. In terms of how that's enforced, that is through the HCA. We have no regulatory power, although we, as I've mentioned, we have statutory powers in terms of repairs and enforcing, if a landlord was breaching a tenant's right to quiet enjoyment, for example. There's laws on harassment and what have you. Duty of care, they have landlord responsibilities. Being a landlord carries with it a set of statutory requirements, some of which are implicit in law, some of which are explicit. So again, it depends on what it is you're expecting a landlord to do and the extent to which their role as landlord extends. Again, it's very difficult to provide you with a very specific answer to something that could be very broad and encompass a whole set of different things. Was there any other question there that I hadn't picked up?
No, what I think we're asking the questions were, I liken this almost to a fishing expedition, because I don't know these things in detail, and just trying to get your best advice as to what there is out there that could help us establish the right kind of relationship that we need to have with the RSLs.
I think that point of accountability is a key one that we might come back to and certainly forward. Now, Sean Keating.
Thank you, Chair. I think we need to understand that in Basingstoke-on-Deane, there are approximately 30 housing associations operating in the area, but 2 of them are different. 2 of them were part of the original associations who bought whole estates. Most of the housing associations in Basingstoke-on-Deane don't own estates. Most of them just own individual houses or pairs of houses, matters of that nature. They're the smaller ones. So, first and foremost, they won't have a head office or even a branch office in Basingstoke. They'll have them somewhere else. The 2 larger associations, one is now called Sentinel and the other one is now called Sovereign, didn't just buy houses. They bought whole estates. So when they bought an estate, they bought the garages associated with that particular estate, and they bought the garage forecourts, they bought the walkways accessing the houses and the garages, and they bought little strips of land which need to be maintained, either with the shrubs in them or with the grass in them, but they need to be maintained. So one of those two housing associations actually have neighborhood managers. The other has housing managers. Where there is a neighborhood management arrangement, they actually contribute positively to maintaining the surrounding estate. Where there is only a housing manager, the housing manager doesn't know anything about maintaining the estate, and it invariably leads to people like us as individual councillors having to prompt them, prod them, cajole them, berate them to just get basic, I'm talking about very basic estate management done. And I can tell you now, I'm on stage 3 of getting estate management that I fixed, or got fixed in 2002. I had to go back in 2008 and start the whole thing again, and now I'm on the third routine, going back to get the same bits of, we're talking about footpaths and things like the same bits of estate. And all I ever said to them was, please put it on a maintenance program. It never happened. It still hasn't happened. And this is after 15 years. Most of my work as a councillor is not sitting in meeting rooms like this. It's dealing with tenant problems. Some of the housing in South Anne has got the highest concentration of social housing in my ward. It's about 40% of all the houses. We've got 3 councillors. Councillor Regan is one of them. Some of the houses are badly designed, badly built, and they have continual problems with damp, right? They have problems with damp to the extent that people actually get ill. They have problems with damp to the extent that people actually try not to dry their clothes indoors, especially in the winter, but they have to. Some of them are badly maintained. And some tenants have got to the point where they actually find out who their councillor is. Most people in most estates never find out who their councillor is, because they don't need to. The reality is, most of the work that I do is dealing with housing association problems, usually exacerbated by the management. Now, they're not the management are not designed to, and they don't operate on the basis of being negative for the purposes of their organisation. They do want to try. They don't necessarily have the budgets. They don't want to spend the budgets. They don't want to identify to their people upstairs that this problem has been going on for 15 years. They don't want to say to people upstairs, oh, we need more money, because they're under pressure all the time. So I'm not knocking housing associations for the sake of it, but what I am saying is tenants should have and need a better deal. And there is no written rules in terms of what the housing association should do. Because you go to them, and believe you me, I go to them all the time, and Councillor Regan and myself are permanently up and down the street going to housing associations, and you go to them and they say, well, okay, we haven't heard of this problem, even though the tenant has complained repeatedly. Now, the other point I wanted to identify is, not only do they not maintain the estate, not only do they not maintain all of the houses, I mean, there are some houses, of course, that don't have maintenance problems. The biggest problem on occasion becomes antisocial behaviour. I'll give you one example. Myself and my councillor colleagues spent 7 years, and I'll repeat that, 7 years, trying to get antisocial behaviour problem sorted. The police were involved, the community support officers were involved, the community management down here was in the council were involved, the social services were involved, the antisocial behaviour officer in the housing association were all involved. Now, I'm not going to tell you where the walls or who they were or whatever, because that would be unprofessional. But anybody who can't solve, any organisation who is the landlord who can't solve an antisocial behaviour problem until the end of 7 years, there's something wrong. Right? We've currently got an antisocial behaviour problem, and I'm not going to give you any more details, but it's been going on for too long, I can assure you, because the tenant is nearly having a nervous breakdown. So these are constant, repeated, repetitive problems that we have to cope with. We do need a protocol. We do need an understanding with the housing association about tenant panels. Tenant panels? We don't even know where they are. We don't know who's on them. We don't know when they meet, and they don't tell us. When we want...
Thanks, Sean. Can I tell you...
Just one more sentence, if I may.
This was what I was hoping to hear by my first question, looking in your direction, but...
But you didn't. You didn't look in my direction for two and a half hours nearly. But it feels like that anyway. But can I just say, the reality is, we do need a housing association to understand that we have a legitimate role in society. They don't even want to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Yes, I sort of separate in my mind, perhaps all of us, your opening comments about the management of estates, which is an issue that affects me and I think the same housing association, and your later comments about, well, not management of tenants, it's not the business of anyone else to manage tenants, but the response to tenants' needs. And perhaps we need to look into how we as councillors can get involved to influence these things. It doesn't seem to me as though there's a direct line. Perhaps if we have trouble finding tenants panels, we could actually set up our own self-help group to find tenants panels and things like that. But I think that those sorts of issues, I think, are extremely serious, and if this is going to be worthwhile, we're going to find out how we can address those. The other thing you said, which I think is worth making particular note of, that apart from 2 housing associations, others, many of them have remote offices, and we don't know where we could make contact with them. Well, we've got information with us as to where they are here, and what we possibly need is a mutual understanding with each of them that we do exist as councillors. Now, Councillor Kubert again. Yes.
You're on there. It just seems a long time, doesn't it?
Okay.
Okay.
Councillor Kubert.
Well, if someone hasn't spoken, they won't wish to speak, I'm very happy to desist till later.
Okay.
Councillor Potter.
Well, Councillor Mrs. Reid would like to speak, and I think it's relevant to what we've just been hearing.
Sorry, Chair. I won't be long because I know there's a long list. But in response to what some of the problems have been raised already by members and by Councillor Keating there as well, would members find it useful if we try to arrange a workshop with the RSLs and bring the RSLs in? Not just the large ones, but we need to actually reach the smaller ones. Obviously, we have a relationship with Sovereign and Sentinel, but we need to try and encourage the smaller RSLs to come in and get them together with members and discuss these problems that are occurring and the fact that there isn't a line of communication, there isn't a perceived line of communication at the moment. So that would be one suggestion to members. And the other thing also, just very briefly, is I understand that CEP are looking at neighbourhood management, I think early next year, is that correct, January? So that could also be part of that piece of work as well. But certainly if members think a workshop would be useful, we'd be happy to try and arrange something like that.
Yes, can I just say that I think what Sean's been saying does emphasise the need for us to take a special approach to the larger housing associations, although I'm entirely in favour of working with all of them. David Potter.
Thank you, Chairman. Probably breaks a habit of a lifetime for me this evening, but I do agree with Councillor Reid. And it just seems to me, although a lot of work has been done, and I do honestly thank the officers for all the paperwork we've got in front of us, and thank those that were involved in scoping. I think there is more work for us to do, and I think the reality is, and we all speculate about this, just how much things have changed over the years in regard to the relationship with housing associations. Their own terms of reference have changed over that time. We know more about some than others, and our method of dealing with them is better in some areas than in others. Sort of stuff Councillor James was saying, really. And there's a whole range. If we muse about partnerships, and if we accept that it is the council and the housing associations and the tenants that we claim to represent that are the partners that we clearly can be talking about here. I mean, I think the part of our terms of reference that we set out ourselves, possibly talking about a housing association guide to best practice or a partnership framework, sort of protocols that all of us, I think, would welcome. I think we'll only get that if we actually do have the sort of workshop that Councillor Reid talks about, where we can gather large and small housing associations together. We can outline the sort of problems that I think we experience day to day as councillors. As I say, it works better with some than others, and we need to have an understood protocol about how that would work. And in simple terms, I mean, somebody said it already, really, it would be a welcome change to all of us to know who we might contact at a housing association to make some progress. And I mean, it's an overused phrase again, but I wouldn't have thought that was rocket science, really, and we've never had that. So there's some simple things, then I think some much better things that we perhaps could aim for. I mean, I know Birmingham probably isn't a very good example because of the size and complexity, but the sort of social housing partnership that exists there, which elected members play a key role in, and that's a cooperative that the housing associations seem to readily take part in, for their benefit as well as elected members, seems to me the sort of thing we ought to be working towards. So I'd welcome a workshop, and I'd welcome individual councillors being encouraged to put in a summary of their own problems that they experience so that we can build on that at the workshop. And I think that would work well for us. And I'm glad, Chair, we didn't have guests here tonight, because I think we would have been all over the place in terms of the way we sought to raise issues with them. But I think we can do much better than that if we go through this process first.
Happily, we've got the chairs of both of the overview committees here, so we don't need to trip over each other. Going forward, if CEP is looking at estates, then we want to be involved in that, but we're not going to tread on each other's toes. And clearly, EPH is going forward on housing. So I think that's a generally approved view. Councillor James. Oh, I beg your pardon. Sorry, Councillor Falconer hasn't spoken yet. I'll let him invite him.
Yeah, just a couple of points. It may be a surprise that in Highclere, Berkeley and St Mary Bourne, 16.1% of my dwellings are actually social rented housing. But fortunately, I haven't had too many problems. The worst one I had recently is a massive outbreak of giant hogweed in Etchingswell. So someone in their garden's got 14-foot high hogweed, but that Sentinel have responded very well to that, I must admit. It struck me taking Birmingham, you look to that and you think, well, that must be easier for them. They've got 2/3 of the property they still own. They've got 54 RSLs to control, and actually at the end of it, when you got to the nub of the report, it was saying what we should have is a great big chart listing all the officers and listing the 54 people and all their officers, so you've got a great big spreadsheet. But it did warn who's going to volunteer to keep the thing updated. But I found that quite a disappointing finale, in that there wasn't a great, magic bullet at the end of it. But listening to the conversations here today, it seems to go into two different areas. One is the legal side, where you've got tenancy agreements, service level agreements, maintenance agreements, etc. And then you've got all the ad hoc stuff that we may get involved with, like regeneration projects. But then we take Councillor Keating's point, is if we have all that stuff in place, what actually happens and what can we actually do if one of those RSLs fail in terms of the service? What is our comeback and what can we actually do? And that's something that concerns me. So I welcome, yes, the charts and the contacts, but somehow we've got to come up with a solution. If we've got a non-performing RSL, what on earth can we do about it? Is it a legal situation or what?
Thank you. Yes, I think getting them here with us properly prepared is a good thing to do. Now, Councillor James.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll cover some of the points that the last councillor mentioned. I think we certainly need to have some sort of document that we can say this is what we expect from our RSLs, and obviously we'd need the RSLs to sign up to it so they could declare themselves approved Basingstoke and Dean RSLs or something, a gold badge that they can wear with pride and stick on their headed notepaper. Sides of the prize is, of course, when we get onto the next topic, we're looking at how we can improve the delivery of affordable housing, and it's very clear that when we choose a preferred partner, the fact that they're good RSLs will be hugely influential in that decision. One of the problems we have at the moment is this disparity between, say, some Sentinel who may have large estates and therefore have an estates manager, an easy to contact person. Then you get the smaller ones where there's some sort of estate manager, but they're based in Bristol and they cover 4 or 5 estates across the country and they change every 5 seconds and they change their regions. It's easy to say, oh, get hold of them, just go on their website. And then you fill out a very strange contact form and you have no idea where it's gone. So you can't go back 2 weeks later and say, where's my response? To click through and find that you've got a housing manager who then turns around and says, no, I don't cover that area anymore. You're now in the southeast, not the southwest. You need to contact someone else. They say, no, we don't go that far south. Then you get someone else emailing you say, no, we don't own any properties at all down there. And then you get someone else turning around and saying, no, I only deal with windows. I don't deal with drains. And you kind of get very tired. So if we were to have something, and I would suggest we do it before the workshop, because one thing would be us to draft what we kind of figure would be a good standard that we want to achieve. Then from that standard, we then have a workshop with the RSLs to see what their issue is with the standards and whether they believe they can stick to it and keep to it. And some of it is simple things, a single point of contact. It doesn't matter if you're a big housing association or small housing association. If you're a councillor and you cover a small 30 house estate that belongs to a certain housing association, there is a single point of contact. You contact them, they will resolve your problem from start to finish, end-to-end management of the issue and problem, rather than this silly, oh, you need to speak to that department, this department, no, we don't cover this, etc., which we always get to. Residence panels seem to exist in some areas, but not in other areas. For small areas, I know from experience, when you try and get a residence panel, you don't find a lot of willing volunteers. And then you do find a willing volunteer who's possibly not the best person to be on it, because they can't attend the next meeting until they've been released from custody. So I appreciate it's harder to get a residence panel, but I think there should be an expectation there is a residence panel, and where a panel cannot be formed because it's a small development, then that panel becomes the quarterly meeting with the ward councillor and we become the panel on behalf of the residents. But at least there's a clear, guaranteed, diarised meeting to discuss issues, resolve issues. It may be a 10-minute meeting that doesn't result in much apart from a quick walk around the estate and say, well done RSL, you're fantastic, we love you. Can you take over that estate over the road as well? And I think the other thing that we need to look at is, obviously, the big RSLs do a lot more than just maintain the estate or hand out rent bills and refurbish kitchens. They often do a lot of other things that are built into other committees that we've looked at in terms of, you know, if you've got South Sovereign or Sentinel, you can attend courses on money management. You can do lots of things that they do in our community centres that reach out to more people. I know I have some very frustrated residents who get a very lovely magazine every year telling them all the wonderful things their RSL is doing, including free college places. All they've got to do is go to Birmingham College on a Monday morning and they can access a course free of charge. It will cost them £200 to get there and take 4 days, but they can get there free of charge. They can actually access the course free of charge. I think we need to say that RSL should be doing more than just being landlords, and the smaller RSLs need to look at saying, can we buy this service from Sovereign? It's called commissioning. It's a wonderful thing. We should probably try it one day. But so that if you happen to be living in a small RSL, living in a property managed by a small RSL, you're not discriminated because you can't access the stuff that you live in Sentinel, you can do this, that and the other. If you live in a Swathling, you can't access any of those things because your RSL is based the other end of the country. So those are three things that I think could be put into that kind of agreement. And I think we need to get our ideas down about what we'd expect from an RSL to reach the gold standard of RSLs for Basingstoke and Dean, and then approach in a workshop environment the RSLs with that document and say, this is what we want you to sign up to. Can you or can't you? And if you can't, why can't you? And then see whether we have to tailor it to get enough people on board. And if one or two RSLs don't want to do it, well, that's fine. They haven't got the gold badge. They've got the black mark. And when we look at investing money in affordable homes, those RSLs may find themselves at the back of the queue, not just in Basingstoke, because we're quite happy to share with the world who we think's good and who we're not impressed with. And it may have a major impact on their business in future. There's my thought. And if you haven't got legal means to deal with RSLs, you can sometimes have other means by awarding them status.
Happy to say we have an officer sitting in the public benches who was going to be involved in selecting or recommending RSLs, I believe. I'm determined to get our money's worth out of the cabinet member while she's here. So, Mrs. Reid.
Just very quickly on one small part of something that Gavin mentioned in terms of doing extra things, what the RSLs do, which contribute more to the community than just providing housing. I was at Sovereign a couple of weeks ago and they were talking about a scheme that they run to get people back into work. And obviously they have an investment in that because if people are in work rather than obviously on benefit, they're more likely to be able to pay their rent. So it's in the interests of Sovereign, Sentinel and the other RSLs to actually run that kind of scheme. So it was a very interesting presentation. They are running that in Basingstoke and they can demonstrate some outcomes from that. So I think that's the kind of thing also that we might like to say to the RSLs, that they bring that to the workshop and demonstrate that kind of good practice and see whether we can perhaps encourage other RSLs for that.
I think it goes a bit further because obviously smaller RSLs, it's just not practical. I mean, I think some of the RSLs that are listed in here, I mean, YMCA do a lot because it's very bespoke, certain age group. Abbeyfield probably won't want to go back to a back-to-work programme, as most of them are perhaps beyond that. But I think it's the London and Quadrants, the Affinity Suttons who don't run these programmes. It may not be practical for them to run them in Basingstoke because they're simply too small, and they send out these glossy magazines inviting people to go to the other end of the country. Well, actually, we want to be able to turn around and say, look, if you're charging the same amount of money for property as Sentinel, you should be providing the same service. And just because you're small is no excuse. Actually, it's great what some of the stuff Sentinel do, but can Swathling, can Redland, can all the smaller ones actually buy into that service as well, so all residents get a fair service and you're not discriminated against because when you came to the top of the list it just happened to be a London and Quadrant property that was available, because that seems unfair on some residents who miss out on some of the great opportunities that are out there.
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt.
And just finally, in relation to the HCA, because I think a letter of undertaking signed between the registered landlord sounds great. I think doing it pre the meeting sounds eminently sensible. In terms of the registration of them and about punitive acts in the event that they don't provide for our residents what we want, is there any way under, when you skim this, landlords post April 2012 need to be registered and have to go through that, but pre don't. Is there any way, if we did draft letter of undertaking which was signed by any registered social landlord that's operating within our borough, that once they've signed it, within the document that we get them to sign, that there is an understanding that if they breach certain rules that they then lose that and then they have to go through a re-registration process? Is that an option that's available to us?
I don't believe so, but we can always invite the HCA to the workshop so they can input a view there.
Because it slightly implies that because there are so many standards within it, the tenant involvement empowerment standards, it seems to be embedded within it lots of opportunities for us to seek redress in the event that we're not happy with the provision of services. So if we formalise it with a letter of undertaking, and we had a named person, and I think it's very important that the named person needs to be very senior. I don't think it, and I don't think it should be, as one of the previous councillors said, someone for maintenance and someone for housing. And I think there should be someone very senior in well, some of these companies are obviously quite small, but I think that would then make it more meaningful, and then it's less likely that we're going to have officers that are changing names all the time, and there will be an obligation in the letter of undertaking that we, the borough operating, is aware of who is the person acting as an interface. I mean, this is probably too minutiae, but it's pretty kind of basic.
They're basic and they're great ideals. Whether or not they're achievable and enforceable in the long term will be subject to discussion. So I think you've talked about putting a shopping list of wishes together. If we compile that shopping list and then put that to the appropriate people to see how they would want to move that forward, I think it's within their gift, not officers' gift, to say whether or not that's doable.
Because I'm not involved in
There
commissioning.
are other people waiting, Ollie.
It's to do with service provision. When in other activities, because I'm not involved in any other commissioning committees, do we not have a service level agreement that requires certain things? That's when I'm saying what I'm saying. I'm thinking it's so obvious that it's not even something that I should even be mentioning because I'm a councillor, and it's something that's so obvious that I would assume it was a given.
I think the point that Councillor Harvey identified right at the start was that when we did have a preferred partnership arrangement, that was predicated on the fact that we were funding and giving approval for funding through local authority social housing grant, which was the great carrot to bring any RSLs to the table. Frankly, we don't have that now. There may be a future commissioning role, in which case, yes, you can set out your list of wants. But as things stand at the moment, the situation with all the landlords is that they're operating within their own sector. We have no regulatory power. We have no commissioning power. We're not necessarily commissioning things from them. So in terms of what to enforce, apart from signing up to a standard, there's very little at the moment we can use. It may change in the future. We may have commissioning powers, but we don't have the...
No, sorry, Laura Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that I think the idea of having the workshops is a good one, but obviously not everybody will attend. I just wondered why we've got so many housing associations in Basingstoke. It just seems like it's spiraled out of control. Nobody is taking accountability for anything. We're struggling to get hold of the smaller ones. And I just wondered if moving forward with all the development we have coming up and the 40% housing, that's going to be, a large area in Basingstoke is going to be social housing. I just wondered if we could put in a preference for a housing association so we can create the relationships and eradicate a lot of these problems, because at the moment it seems a bit of a free fall and things need to change.
I guess that's what we'll find out at the workshop, what appetite there is for signing any protocols that we come up with, and certainly we can look at what remedies there might be available to enforce any activities that are on that protocol. But as Kate said, there's precious little we can do at the moment.
Can I just ask, so how do social landlords come into Basingstoke? Do they just buy the properties, or so there's no control on who comes in?
We controlled who we transferred the stock to. Thereafter, the transferred stock organisations can go off into their own group mergers. In terms of the other 30, they're here for very different reasons, depending on what stock they have, how old that stock is. There may be that there have been RSLs that have joined the Basingstoke and Dean scene in only the last 10 years, but that's because of the changing in the way that investment in social housing has come about. And investment has been directed through the Housing Corporation with negligible input from the Borough Council, apart from to support the ethos of the development that's being improved. So being considered. So for each RSL has a different history with us, a different track with us, and it's that historical pattern. And we would love to be in a position to sit in a room and rationalise their stock for them, notwithstanding any choices that tenants may make about who their landlord would want to be. Unfortunately, we don't have that power. It would make our life a lot easier as well.
Sean Keating.
Thank you, Chair. The idea of the workshop I support wholeheartedly. And actual fact, I would suggest we need two. We need one for the two large housing associations, with the vast majority of the houses in Basingstoke that are registered landlords, and a different workshop for the multitude of smaller housing associations, because they don't have property or estate management issues. And I wouldn't want a workshop that didn't deal with estate management issues, and neither would I want to impose on the 27 for them to listen to a whole range of issues that is not specific to them, specific enough. But I've been talking about the registered landlord in our patch, and I do want to say it doesn't just have houses in Southampton. It also has houses in other parts south of the railway line. And when the flooding happened in Buckskin, I do want to put on record, they were brilliant. They were absolutely brilliant. And so they're not all negative stuff. They can do exceptionally good work. But I genuinely do. The two large social landlords, I think a housing workshop with them alone would take up the whole night or the whole week. But certainly a week. 2 weeks perhaps, but we could stretch it to 2 weeks.
Thank you for that threat.
Thank you.
Councillor Golding.
Thank you. I'd just like to come back to one of the points I raised earlier, but just preface that with saying, I think the whole protocol idea has got to be good. But we need to be fairly restrained in what we need to focus on the really important things, given that we don't actually have any carrots at the moment until we want cooperation. Personally, I would like to see included on that a request that we should, as councillors, have a single point of contact in each of these housing associations. But assuming they line up with Tracy and come back and say it's all life is too complicated and we can't, my question for officers is, can we have a single point of contact within the officers so that whichever housing association we've got, whatever issue we've got, we go to one person and you find out who it is that we need to contact in the housing association and just get back to us within a specified service time with their phone number and email. So if it's too complicated for us to do it, will you please do it?
The answer to that is, again, it cuts across different departments. But I would be disappointed if you came through to any officer in the council and they didn't undertake, either through delegating elsewhere or from coming back to you having found out the information, they would tell you how that could be done. If our officers weren't doing that and providing that level of contact and service, I think we, as managers, we'd be disappointed.
We can come to any of you and get an answer. Thank you.
I was expecting the answer to be, what do you want us to stop doing then? Councillor Reid.
Thank you. Just again, very briefly, Tracy's just reminded me, when Sentinel brought the paper to H&E earlier this year, asking us to relinquish our board status, they made the offer of coming to us at least once a year and having a meeting with members. So we could certainly try to progress that, maybe ask for it perhaps every 6 months, and also with Sovereign as well, which might be helpful. And that's in addition, obviously, that's a separate thing to the workshops, but I think it might be useful to see whether we could get them to come in and have those regular meetings with members as well.
Councillor Regan.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few brief points. Think about the contact in one central point. We do that at Sovereign now. It's called a contact centre, and you just talk to someone at the switchboard, and then somebody might get back to you. In the past, there is no golden pass, but before I was councillor, you had I could ring up the director or chief executive and get through to them and speak to them and to follow up problems. You can no longer do that, because they now see themselves. I mean, I touched what Sean said about Sovereign. They do good things, not all bad things. They have done some good social work in our ward, and they own the neighbourhood partnership as well. But they see themselves as a business. They don't see themselves as an extension of carrying on from the council has in the past, or being only a sense of history. They are there as an organic organisation to grow, as they do, and swallow up the smaller house associations, And once you get there, come a giant bureaucracy, and they actually go there to defend themselves, and they get very, very defensive when you ask them to do things. So that's one of the major problems. So if we can get them in, I agree with Sean was saying, get the two major ones in, Sentinel and Sovereign into a workshop, and actually get them to agree to a protocol, a set of rules, agreement with us, which probably could be reviewed every year or whatever, to be signed up. That would be the way forward. And you're right, we have no. The only power people have is money, and we haven't got the money to give them those to build houses. So, and going on to the member for Winkelbury over there was saying that the reason why there's so many different housing associations is buy to let, and people then moving on and selling them back to housing associations. That's what's happening. We're getting the small ones, but the predominant one of the large ones is the two large ones because the Tories sold off all the council housing, and we're now living the results of it.
I think we've got to move towards some conclusions. So sorry, I've got more than two more speakers, but I just want anyone who speaks after this to be finalising their view as to where we go from here. Councillor Cubitt.
Yeah, no, I think you've teased out some really useful things. What I would be very apprehensive about is the meeting, the workshop taking place without somebody driving a skeleton voluntary letter of undertaking. And I think that needs to be, as Councillor Golding refers, simple, keep it simple, stupid, refer to pretty much the key things that are referred to in the HCA document, but not made really lengthy word-wise. But I do believe that a dedicated board member, no less, should be absolutely a given point of contact for us councillors, because, you know, it's not like they're some kind of great big rarefied company that we shouldn't be enabled to talk to a dedicated board member. So I think of the bigger companies, we definitely ought to be permitted to speak to a dedicated board member who's responsible for the borough's relationships. And finally, I absolutely agree with what Councillor James says, is that once we have this voluntary letter of undertaking which we get them to sign, which won't be too onerous, but will require that we then say that only those operating in our borough who have signed this voluntary letter of undertaking will be permitted to be considered going forward.
They have to be registered generally, registered housing associations with the Housing Corporation, but that would be by the Housing Corporation's regulatory means, not necessarily by ours. But if we invite the HCA to the meeting, then we can explore how that can be used. I think I obviously haven't made myself clear. What I mean is that when we build a lot of the housing which we're going to be building over the next couple of years, I'm referring to the carrot and stick reference that Councillor James was referring to. It is that when we decide to have X 100,000 houses built on council-held land, it will only be to those providers that have signed our voluntary letter of undertaking that will be considered at all. And that's a really sensible way of running a business, our business for our borough residents. And I don't think it's too demanding. It's completely rational behaviour. And there was one other point which I've forgotten. There was one other really important thing I wanted to say.
Right to us afterwards, something. I think we're going to have a legal opinion before we can put that down as a review. Yes.
So it was just that in the next paper we discover we've given Sentinel 250 grand to buy 7 units, and we gave them another 680 to buy 17 units. Yeah, that's serious wonga. That's a lot of money, you know, and we are in a position to give other people who show that they're good citizens in our borough and meeting the needs of our residents and have signed a voluntary letter of undertaking.
But we did that so that people could live in them, didn't we? Councillor Harvey, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up 2 or 3 points pretty quickly. Councillor Edwards raising the point about how many we've got in the borough, and then Kate raising the issue about managing all of that. Just reminded me that for the days of council housing, but I didn't realise that was another councillor read at another time. Just to pick up the point about governance, I think we shouldn't lose that. And it is interesting in the paperwork. If you go to page 55, 2.1, the principles of co-regulation, It says here that the primary responsibility for achieving their organisation's social housing aims lies with the boards of private registered providers and the councillors who govern local authority housing services. There's some interesting language in this. It's not the only place it refers to that relationship. And I do appreciate what Kate and Tracy have said and Councillor Reid have said in terms of the relationship. I do understand that totally. But it is interesting when we own land. Now, the quid pro quo as part of the Fremantle, Taverner and Westray was the social housing element. That was really important to us, particularly to those residents that moved out of the other properties. There's other land that we own. We want, obviously, as a land-rich borough, want to see the right kind of development in that context. So the land aspect is quite a big carrot, huge big, and I think that's a key fact related to the other paper, as has been said. Buying the individual properties, the coordination of that, there's little bits of policy that all fits nicely if it was coordinated, I think, through this piece of work, and it's really important. So the governance side of things, I think, is very interesting in how do we influence, with our responsibility, the governance structures of these groups. And the tenancy strategy, I think, is important. Now, I don't know. You're the experts in this. I totally understand and respect that. But with the experience on the other side of it now, seeing what the tenants panels aren't doing, or the lack of them, or seeing the disengagement of tenants with the RSL management structure, I would be looking to the tenancy strategy myself, if that's the right place to start at least. And if not, where would you signpost us to start? In that specific relationship between the tenants and the organisations and the governance relationship that they should be. If it's not us, then it has to be them. So what's the plug that we need to put in place? On the workshop idea, I think that's an excellent idea, I really do. Question I would have going into that is the same as others have raised. I'd like us to see a prepared structure before we walk in there with the aims as you've all described. No issue here about keeping it high level and appropriate, but just having the protocol and then having them all sign up to it is one thing. Having an ongoing relationship where you develop, as Birmingham and done and others, a social housing partnership across the borough, whereby you bring in the preferred partners and you do the relationship building with those particular bodies that are willing to work with us, is great. And as Gavin says, why can't you work with others of the smaller to work more closely together? And the perfect example of that is the I think it's Rob's committee, the Council Golden's committee, the point about the furniture project that Sovereign are running is perfect if that was something that was best practice to roll out across. There's sorts of little individual examples, but the point being a more constructed, organised social housing partnership across the borough may solve some of the very issues in terms of the greater number of those that were willing to take part in it. And those that don't take part in it are doing their tenants a disservice. It's a publicly noted thing, and it should be publicly noted. And in a sense, they are being found out. They're being named, aren't they, as not being willing to be part of our better way of doing things. And more fool them, really, for operating in our borough. But those that do work with us could be rewarded in positive ways in terms of the land and the way we operate in the future.
I've seen Councillor Golding, then Keating.
I agree with it. Just a cautionary note. I mean, when I was portfolio holder, we did have regular meetings about every 2 months, liaison meetings with the housing associations. Central and Sovereign came every time. The others were very hit and miss. Even the third and fourth largest ones on this list, they'd come sometimes, and very often the next time it was someone different. So we'll try again, but it is not going to be easy. Sorry.
Sure.
Thank you, Chair. The last point I want to make is a different point, and that is there's absolutely no doubt when any organisation has the purse strings that the housing associations want to access the money from, the housing association will listen. Now, that's a fact of life, and the HCA does actually funnel money to housing associations. And I believe we should seek with the HCA to get a protocol, because they actually have protocols and they use them, especially where housing associations exist with councils that already have their own houses as well, council houses. So I think we should seek to get one of their protocols and convert it to a Basingstoke and Dean protocol. Thank you.
That's good. I've seen Councillor Miller now. I was just going to draw attention to, on the page after the one that Paul Harvey referred to, page 56 in our bundle, 9 of the regulatory document. What I'd like to feed in as an objective for this workshop and what follows is halfway down the page, Roman 4, tenants should have opportunities to shape service delivery and to hold the responsible boards and councillors to account. I don't mind being held to account. In fact, I have no powers in this whatsoever. But I would have thought that since it is difficult for tenants to organise themselves into committees, that would be something for us to channel. I'm in fact building on what Gavin said about us being the panel, and we should, I think, aim to be recognised as that. Paul Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to follow on from what you just said, because in this regulatory document, I think we've got the bones or the framework of exactly what we want. And this is written by the HCA. The regulator, as it keeps quoting through here, has set standards. You know, it says in there that providers shall. Now, shall in some worlds is a mandatory instruction. This is, we can hold your feet to the fire over this one. Now, I think a representative, it was suggested, says I can't remember, that a member of the HCA come to the workshop. Absolutely necessary. So we get the right advice, because I think there's your framework for the protocol. Absolutely. If we, to draft up a document, I quite agree, but certainly you could almost lift a lot of this out of this and put it in the Basingstoke and Dean context for every single RSL. I'm just trying to input that because it could facilitate us getting this workshop off the ground.
Now, let me see if I can summarise where we are, which is much easier than I was expecting it would be, because we all we all want a workshop with housing associations. We're not entirely agreed on whether it's one or more than one, and I suggest we don't need to make that decision now. We have a significant list of things we want to achieve there. In my case, I want to achieve recognition of ourselves as a representative of tenants and our obligation to help tenants shape their services. We've had discussions about how difficult it is to get houses maintained, how difficult it is to get estates maintained, and we've had a call for a single point of contact. I have to say I'm sceptical about the director idea. What I want is to be able to contact the person who can actually do something about the problem we're dealing with, and who doesn't need me to go onto the land registry to show a map to tell them where it is I'm talking about. And that's it. So how are we going to set? Oh yes, and of course we very strongly had asserted we need to start with a document that is ours that we lay in front of the. I'm not really laying down the sequence here, but and so we do need a group to deal with that. Seems to me the responsibility clearly lies with the cabinet member, but we have members of 3 committees involved in this, and we want. From this experience, incidentally, I've made 2 decisions. One of them is that I am going to be involved in all the scoping and planning groups for this committee. And secondly, I'm not going to cajole, force or push anyone to be in a group they're not really enthusiastic about, just in order to get some sort of party balance. But could I suggest that this should begin with myself and the chairman of GEP and the chairman of EPH, and we will then receive applications from volunteers who want to join that group. And of course, we'll be working with the existing highly regarded officers to produce the document before we go forward. Meanwhile, of course, the arrangement for the workshop can be planned and worked on in parallel with that. Would that be acceptable? I see Paul Harvey.
And if you're looking for a volunteer, I'll happily join you in doing that. And
that's subsequent. Good, we've got enthusiasts, but I'm not going to be looking around trying to cajole anyone else in. Tracy.
Could I just ask about timescales, please? Because we're already going to be supporting the portfolio holder with a map on supporting people. We've got the allocations review to implement, and we've got the COG reporting on homelessness all in the next 6 months.
Yes, well, we better do it sooner then, haven't we? I've just been shown a phrase that I only learnt very recently, which is a task and finish group. Well, this would definitely be a group that's got to finish, and it will be tasked. I don't think we can, around this table, sort out that timetabling thing. I think we need to sit and talk things through, but I don't really want this to languish. We'll have to see who we need. I can see the cabinet member now.
Sorry, I'm aware that Councillor Cubitt has her hand up, but just pertaining to this point. Obviously, I would request that group liaises quite closely with officers in terms of timescales and so on to make sure that it's within the work programme. And also, do members want us to pursue the idea of getting Sovereign and Sentinel to come in for a yearly or 6 monthly meeting with members to update? That's separate from the workshop.
I think that would be good, certainly as a Sovereign customer by proxy. Holiday.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it'd be great if that was in the letter of undertaking, the voluntary letter of undertaking for a meeting. I'm just really worried about the sequence, and I know how things operate in councils and councillors, and I hope you wouldn't forgive me if I make an alternative suggestion, which is that the cabinet member, together with the officers, draft a first draft of this letter of undertaking. Then the letter that is drafted by the officers together with the cabinet member is then circulated to that group that you identify. Then you have the regional representative of the HCA come in to discuss it, and then you have the workshop with the providers to iron out issues that might be. And if you do it that way, it could be quite a lot quicker, probably.
I think that's too much detail, frankly, Ollie. If the responsibilities we've outlined are accepted, then we've got to get together and examine priorities. And is that we are going to get together, as I said, and we might decide that's the way to do it. But I don't think this committee of however many it is, 14 and 6 officers, is the right place to go into that level of detail. But I do want to sit, the 3 of us, with some of you early, even if the decision of that is we can't do it before Christmas.
Me 2016.
Yes, David Potter.
Well, Chair, can I just check? I mean, I think I've heard you right. I mean, you're talking about yourself and the 2 respective chairs meeting as a group of 3. I mean, I can't see the logic in that when you've got Paul Harvey, Councillor Harvey and Councillor Keating volunteering to contribute. What is the logic in the 3 of you wise men getting together? That's rubbish, isn't it?
I was pulling Dr. Harvey's leg.
Well, okay. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I haven't got a sense of humour then. But
There's Paul.
The rationale behind Scrutiny and the 2 policy committees is that Scrutiny is tonight doing its job very well indeed. It's looking at an existing problem we want to solve. The policy committees, and I thought that's Scrutiny. But if we want to take this forward and establish the protocols and the policy within the council of how we handle the RSLs in the future, comes under a policy remit. I've just been speaking aside to Councillor Golding, and in fact it probably straddles both the responsibilities that we have in our respective committees. So it's identified at the workshop, and I'd be very grateful if Councillor Watts joins us. I think this is a big team takes this forward. The extra responsibility for establishing the protocols probably lies a bit between myself and Councillor Golding. Then Scrutiny can get on with the other work it has to do to identify other issues that are coming along. It's a kind of a flow, if you like, of responsibility. Otherwise, all you're going to have in this council is a scrutiny committee. But we take it on off you. You get on doing what the job you're doing as per the constitution and the responsibilities that everybody's agreed to. But that's the rationale behind.
Forgive me, I
all
think
this.
this is all a waste of time. The three of us and those interested meet with the officers, and we have to talk about what's realistically possible before we get into any detail as to who's going to do what. I believe that's right. Are you happy that that one meeting might be soon? Uh, you're not happy that it might be soon, in my terms. No. Okay.
Significant resource issue, and your question earlier about what date you want us to do would be a serious consideration. Unless we have.
Yes. Okay. I mean, we'll take this away. It could be that one officer time will be sufficient to talk to us about the sequence and the timetable and so on. I really don't think this committee of all these people should be discussing the nitty-gritty detail. We've decided what we want to do, and we're going to get on with it without doing any damage to anything that's important to us. Paul Harvey, Rob Golding.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up that point, respecting Tracy and Kate's and the department's issues, that is an issue for the directors, because the resourcing of this committee, the resourcing of EPH and the resourcing of CEP, if we're going to do these pieces of work, is an issue that the directors, not Tracy's, but it's not their department, this is across the council, the directors need to deal with, and in future the CX, on the basis of how we do resource these pieces of work that we as members want to do. Obviously committee services have got the role, but beyond that, there's the element of resourcing it from the policy experts and from the departments themselves. Now, through you three chairs, the only way that's going to get resolved is feeding the bill. I'm sure you've already done it. So actually, if that has been done, the question now begs, okay, directors, what's the answer? So that's the issue really for us, rather than forever putting it on Tracy's shoulders of, can you find somebody else in housing to give us the time to do the job?
We've decided what we, the members, want to do. We can't pin down the detail tonight. So, sorry, Councillor Golding.
Just very briefly to say that I would rather we met as the members with the portfolio holder and perhaps some community services soon, and without the housing officers if they're too busy, than that we delayed the meeting a long time.
Yes, I agree with that. I will take responsibility for arranging a meeting, and then once I've handed the whole thing over to you two, I'll run away as fast as I can. I'm going to call a break for 10 minutes now. Yep.
already.
Well, we're not going to finish at 9, that's for sure, but I'm not sure that we will spend very long on this second housing thing. Members, will you take your seats, please? We now have a vast pack of information supplied by the officers. Thank you very much. The only other thing on the plan was that we were inviting one supplier of low-cost housing in, and I felt that for us to invite just one in was to possibly give a misleading impression as to the relationship. And secondly, I also felt that there's plenty we need to talk about internally before we're ready to invite anybody like that in. Now, the scope, I'll actually read it out in case it's not right in front of you. Over several years, the target for new affordable housing in Basingstoke has been missed. Recently, Section 106 contributions for off-site provision of affordable housing have been left unspent. Proposal is for the Scrutiny Committee to review the actions that have been taken to improve the achievement against targets, giving particular attention to the application of funds held by the Council and the use of Council-owned land. Further, the Scrutiny Committee will investigate the prospects for using Council land for early development of low-cost housing near to the location of residents in the greatest need. Now, I'm personally very much in favour of us spending our time on things that move us forward rather than a lot of time on what has or hasn't happened in the past, but it's all there in the scope. I from the documents which I've reviewed for the second time, having also read them when they first came out, I've noticed some interesting things like joint venture. What became of the joint venture? I don't know that. Perhaps I haven't read things thoroughly enough. And there was an action that there would be a list of potential sites, and I don't know what's become of that. This also has come from the scoping group, and I'm going to ask Gavin James if he will lead the next session.
Well, I should make an early contribution. Essentially the scoping meeting, the scoping group sort of outcome says it all really. We tragically fail, or have done in recent years, on our affordable housing policy. It's not necessarily the policy, the numbers of builds just haven't come through. And it's perhaps where we need to be looking at other ways of delivering that affordable housing. And in the background, during all that time, the housing waiting list has continued to increase and grow. So although we have a target, and obviously we'll soon have a local plan, and if you work out 40% of the local plan housing target, it does come to our affordable housing target, which makes absolute sense. But because of those sort of fallow years, we've got a lot of catching up to do if we're going to start denting the housing waiting list. And I think the lack of affordable housing is the main reason for it. I think whenever we look at issues in the private rented sector, a lot of that is because there's a lack of housing supply, which means the private rented sector doesn't have to be competitive. It can get away with whatever it wants to do because there's always an ample supply of people wanting to move in. And I think affordable goes beyond social housing, which I think is truly affordable. The modern term affordable is one that I'm not sure it's the right phrase to use for it, because the reality is for a lot of families on average wages who are the kind of people that should be buying their own homes, or at least part buying their own homes, actually those houses are out of reach. I think it's included in the documentation that the average income is well short of anybody trying to buy their own home outright. So we need to look at how we can deliver more affordable homes, but truly affordable, not just to rent, but also to buy and part buy, that actually meets the needs of the financial capacity of our residents to actually afford them. Because too often people who are working hard, often keeping down 2 jobs, and lots of my meet, just cannot afford to buy a home they need because their wages just aren't enough. So it's looking at what opportunities there are to fill the gap and increase the supply of affordable housing, not necessarily affordable just in pure terms of rent, but actually even to buy. How can we bring the cost of housing down within the borough using all the resources at our disposal, such as land and also money, and also looking at emerging technologies. And I will mention perhaps a quick sort of personal thing of mine is the fact that housing is now beyond bricks and mortar. We seem to be stuck in a bricks and mortar world in Basingstoke and perhaps in Britain to a large extent. And to give you an example, I looked out my office window a couple of months ago and I can see the John Lewis store being built. And a container was delivered, and that was the start of an office for them to manage the development. When I went back to work on Friday, having been somewhere else on Thursday, all 6 containers were in, all 6 containers were bolted together, they had power, they had water, they had running toilets, and they were inhabited by people using computers with Wi-Fi. It took 48 hours. And yet with housing developments, it seems to take months. Now, I appreciate they're not pretty, and we probably want to do a bit more external work on them if they were going to be a long-term housing, but it shows what can be done. And when we get to situations where we look at many down and we say, oh, we can only do this so many houses over the next few years because it takes that long to build them, I don't know why the commercial sector can build something perfectly inhabitable in 2 days and we can't do anything for another 10 years. So there are huge opportunities by embracing modern technology to both bring down the cost of housing and speed up the delivery of housing. And I think that's critical not just for the residents, but also for the construction industry, because clearly at the moment there seems to be a thing of they buy a large piece of land, they then borrow the money to not only buy the land but to do the development, they pay interest on that loan, and then when it comes to coming out with the houses, they say we can't deliver 40% because the cost of development was so high, and a large portion of that is the interest they paid on that loan. If they could build quicker, they reduce the interest they pay on that loan. So at the moment, there seems to be 2 main strands of affordable housing delivery. One is the 106 payments where we say 40%, they give us a business plan and it says they can't do any more than 20%, or even worse, they say, here's a check for off-site provision. And obviously the Home Housing and Communities, whatever it's called, association that come up with funding, which is kind of at the mercy of some government minister somewhere who may not like us or maybe having his budget cuts. We need to create new strands of delivering affordable housing, and that's one of the reasons to bring it here.
Thank you. Dereliction of duty, I'd forgotten that Councillor Tilbury's been waiting all this time to talk to us. So would you like to come talk now, Ian?
Yeah, just briefly to say, an interesting discussion on the previous paper. I would say the tenants panels have gone. They have regional panels now, and the region we're in is Hampshire, so that's not very local, is it? And they actually do discourage residents from talking to councillors. We come right on the bottom of the list if you've exhausted every possibility, by which time you've probably lost the will to live as well, of going through their own procedure, you can possibly speak to your local councillor, it says, or MP. And the other thing I would point out on that paper, there are actually contact details for 27 housing associations, but there are 32 on the list. So there's 5 there that's sort of missing. I noticed because one of them is in my area there, and they are quite difficult to get hold of. But I know where the lady who runs it lives, so that helps. But because she lives in one of their houses, funny enough. But yeah, I mean, I've been a councillor for 12 years, and affordable housing has been a big issue throughout that time, and it's just getting worse and worse. And we were quite good at getting some delivered, going back when there was money coming from the government. There's no money from government coming through now. We're looking at 40% affordable housing, but most of that would be 80% affordable rent there, because there isn't the money to provide it. And you know, and all that we're going to do is produce a lot of very expensive houses that the vast majority of the people who go into them will have to have massive amounts of housing benefit to pay. We're paying out £48 million a year in this borough. It was less than 10 when I became a councillor. That money would be far better spent on providing housing. Instead, it's just going to pay either landlords or, in many cases, private landlords. So, you know, we've got the money to build houses. We've got massive amounts of money. We got from the sale of the council houses, probably the biggest disaster of all this borough. You know, thanks to my MP, in fact, Sir George Young, he brought in the legislation, and we went along with it, and you know, we are where we are now, and that's where we've lost the control over the housing associations, or you know, over our own houses there, to the detriment of the tenants. But we have got the money. The point is, and we said, you know, when we get this money, we will use it to provide more affordable housing. That was what, 1996, and what have we done since? Absolutely nothing with it. You know, we were using some of it to recycle through social housing grant, but we can't do that anymore. So we've actually got to start spending that money. We've sat in the bank long enough
doing nothing, and at the moment we're not even getting any interest. So let's get on and build some houses and stop messing about, because all we do is talk about building houses. There used to be a simple solution years ago. The council built the houses and that was it. It was straightforward. We built good quality houses that stood the test of time. The only ones we've ever suffered with in Basingstoke are the ones built by London County Council. They're inflicted on this borough. If you look at the ones like where, you know, Sean and I live, the old red brick ones, and one Colin as well, you know, there's nothing wrong with any of them. You know, in fact, they sell on the open market for £250,000 or more in Overton now. So we were very good at building houses, and I suggest we go back to doing that, not before time. So thank you very much for that, Chair.
Thank you. There is the matter of land, which is mentioned in the motion. Who else? Councillor Cubitt.
I don't know whether anybody's seen a paper. It's very annoying because I haven't got the paper with me, but it's a paper that's been submitted to the inspector, and it's on page, I think it's 108 of the housing. It's one of the topic papers. There's 4 papers. And there's a graph. It's really annoying. I've left it behind. And the graph is our projected house building over the next 20 years to 2027. And the reason for my stating this is because throughout all the papers here that we've been given for this agenda item, it was predicted that we were going to have this drop in house building for affordable homes. And I agree with Councillor James. There's 2 words I can't bear. They're both complete misnomers. One is affordable homes and the other is viability. And they're completely meaningless, they're completely useless, and they shouldn't be allowed to be used in any document, in my opinion. But if you look at this graph, and if the inspector does accept the plan that's been submitted, we're going to start building, I think, 1,400 units in a couple of years' time. So whilst there's this lull, which was always predicted, we're going to have major catch up with the 300 target if that plan is accepted. And I just think that should be on the table, so that whilst there are lots of really serious issues which I agree with that we need to discuss, it does seem to me that the council, if the plan is accepted, is on top of the 300 if you annualise it.
Paul Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, agreeing with both what Gavin and I have said so far, I think the issue that really stands out is, on the one side, understanding why what happened, and then what are the ongoing issues that need to be resolved, because some of it is time specific and some of it relates to what was rather than what will continue to be. And we need to understand the what will continue to be problems that need to be resolved. That's the key of any scrutiny, I think. What that's got to lead to is delivery. I mean, we can talk about it till the cows come home, but the reality is most of the councils in this country who are succeeding are those councils that are actively engaging with developers and actively engaging with RSLs to jointly deliver projects where they are talking about what is required locally. So you're right, you can bang all the houses, thousands of houses. We can talk about all the houses that are going to get built in Basingstoke over the next 20 odd, 30 odd years. But are they the right houses for local people to be able to afford? Are they the right rented product for local people to be able to afford? And are our RSLs going to be able to have the product for them to socially rent that will be able to afford? It's multiple layers to this. It isn't just as simple as saying there's the affordable level. It is also the rented sector and the market sector. But within that, you've got the developer who will sit there in exactly the way Gavin describes, with the land and the options. They cannot deliver on their own what we require. The RSL on its own cannot deliver what we require. And we as a council cannot on our own deliver specifically what we require. But the one thing we've got that they don't have is access to capital from the sale of council houses that we should be looking to invest at a better return for our taxpayers, but also a return on rent that delivers a rent that people can afford. But also land. We have the choice. We can choose, because we are a land-rich authority, to do things in ways that others are doing already. Both Conservative, Liberal Democrat and Labour councils around the country are already doing this. It ain't breaking the mould, this. We're playing catch-up to an awful lot of authorities that are doing really good work. So the question for scrutiny really is, okay, if we could understand, these papers are really good, and I really do, thank you again. They show us where we've come from. What I want to understand right now, and maybe it's a case of talking to the HCA, maybe it's a case of talking to the Housing Federation, to our officers, to those who are in delivery, like Gavin says, in terms of flat pack, It's talking to understand, okay, so what are the current impediments to you actually delivering? The policy side to it is, okay, what are the delivery mechanisms we need to invent to actually achieve something on the ground? Because the local plan is going through, so some of those decisions are being made and taken now. The policy framework's being put in place. We're not starting with a zero-sum game because our officers have already done things and are doing things, and I'm hoping on Lily there might be some examples of that. There's just one particular one I can point to. It's not as if you aren't doing anything, but the reality is the problem is huge. I mean, the housing waiting list, I know we can cut it in half and we can have that debate, but that isn't going to take that problem away. It's not as if that disappears overnight. Those issues still remain. So for me, the housing crisis in Basingstoke is a one to buy, because most people can't really afford a mortgage. Not really. Not on the incomes related to mortgages, and sustain those mortgages and hold those mortgages down. To rent, the rented sector is saturated and the landlords are making an absolute killing at the moment from residents as much as from housing benefit. That's a massive issue. And the quality of that rented sector is huge as well. I think the quality of the rented sector in Basingstoke is something that is an issue in itself. And we're coming up against that issue consistently now in our wards with not just the empty homes, but also the actual product of rented HMOs and all the rest of it. But that's a separate issue to this particular, but it's one that relates. It's the provision of how you solve that, I think, and provide the housing that meets the need. And then there's the social housing question. And affordable rent isn't affordable. You know, social rent in some cases, because it's now drifting up, there has to be a Basingstoke, I've said this before, there has to be a Basingstoke rent. What is the true affordable rate in Basingstoke at which we could rent properties to people who could then genuinely afford to keep the roof over their head in work, as much as having to rely on being topped up by benefit? And I know Di's done the work, no, true, and I know Di did a tremendous amount of work on this, and I know and Tracy and Kate, and to all of you, you've done the work on this. The question I would ask now is, okay, thank you very much. How are we going to use that to actually deliver what we need? So there's two sides to this, Chair. There's the scrutiny bit, and then there's the policy bit, and I'd like to see us do something on it, something pretty concrete to help the Cabinet member deliver.
Sorry, I just wondered if the related response. Anneli Kubit.
Just following on from what Councillor Harvey said, in terms of the scrutiny process, I think what would be a very interesting exercise tonight, I don't know whether my fellow colleagues would agree, is that the paper in March 2012 detailed some really good ideas. Okay, it's just a tip in that ocean because we know what the needs are, but it's very specifically dealt with how to spend that 850,000 odd Section 106 money. And there was a very good case study put forward by our officers. It was really superb. Option 1, option 2, option 3, I think there were 6 options. One would provide 45 units, blah, 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 in various good different guises. Then nothing happened until we gave Sentinel 250 grand to buy 7 units. So the monies that was Section 106 that could have built 45 to 50 houses, depending on what the structure was, ended up being 7 units for Sentinel for 250 and then 17 units for temporary homelessness over a 2-year period. So if we are to do scrutiny, and we have got a huge issue, and I agree with the affordability issue, but we also have, Councillor Tilbury's completely correct, money's still there that were given, well, that we got in order to promise to build more houses, and then we've got all this land that we own. We must somehow work out how we screwed up with that 850,000 Section 106 money in order to work out how not to screw up going forward with much bigger sums of money in order to build some flipping council houses for our residents.
Graham Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just following on in more recent times, I did actually read the whole lot. I rejoice that I had the opportunity. I started off with 2 questions on affordable housing, and at the end of it, I ended up with about 45. It was somewhat more complicated than I originally thought. On page 212 is...
I know that one.
Yeah, it's a report to Housing and Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which charges it with looking at all the issues, I think, which we're quite concerned with today. So my question would be, that was in March. Obviously, we had a new constitution, but what happened to that action for that particular committee to consider all these points? The points on 213. It's page 2 of 13 of the actual report.
Is it fair to ask the cabinet member to give us an opinion on that, since she wasn't a cabinet member at the time?
Sorry, Chair, I'm just reading the recommendations from that. So there was note and comment, and then motion was taken forward through the COG process, which is still ongoing at the moment. They're coming forward with a recommendations and outcomes in January, I believe it is. It's coming to committee, and then the SHMA has been, Di, we're coming on that.
There's the SHMA update. We've had new income information for 2014. So what's actually happened on the assessment of affordability is that it's been decided that 2014 data is used. 2014 data is now starting to be rolled out and used for practical considerations. So along with household income, which is a more fine-grained level than the last year's SHMA, the update is now continuing for 2014, and we should have the results of that very shortly. So that's where we are with the recommendation 2.3.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to go to the point of what is affordable housing, and who does it actually help, because obviously probably one of the youngest in the room, and I've had the difficulty of wanting to buy my own place, having to save for it, but also I looked at the other options around, and I felt that I almost fell into a gap where I had a job, I was, the amount of money I needed to buy a property is ridiculous, and unfortunately now I got to a point where I could save for the deposit. But I think we need to start looking at what affordable housing, who it helps, how does it help them, and also what we have on offer. I think that shared ownership is too expensive. I have many friends who took up that offer and they are trapped. They've got to the point where they can't expand their families and they bitterly regret it. But then they also say that the renting in the area is too high, they can't afford to buy. So technically, they're homeless, and they're saying we need to inherit some money, and they're literally waiting for relatives to die, which situation nobody wants to be in. So I think we need to look at who gets the opportunity to get the homes. And also I think this 40% is a nice figure, but how do we really achieve it, because it's not being met? Would it be a possibility of going back to the registered social landlords, of maybe creating a deal with them? I know Thames Valley do house building, so do A2 Dominion. And we can then work with the developer and the council to create maybe 60% social housing. And then we can move forward to help out the gap of people who are in employment but who just can't raise that deposit. It's just a few ideas.
Thank you.
Councillor Miller.
Paul Miller.
I've heard, going back to the H&E report of March last year and also this evening, I hear the expression, we got oodles of land. Now, one of the exercises that we're going through in both CP and one I've already suggested for EPH is to actually identify what land within this borough is owned by the borough. Because there are some owned by the borough, and forget many down because there are 3 owners. You can't do anything without the agreement of the other 2, and one of them wouldn't go this way anyway. The comment made in the scoping was to identify land near to where the people are in the most need. I will almost guarantee you we're not going to find enough land in that criteria to build 5 houses, not with the associated infrastructure. I think it'd be very difficult. But before we go down that street, we need to identify the real estate that we really own that is developable. Is there a word? But really, that's what I mean, trying to encapsulate it. That exercise still, as far as I understand, has not been done. We probably have the data, but we've got to actually translate the data to in some format we all understand. We can see it on a map. But until we do that, it's very difficult to then progress. If we don't have the land where we would like the land, but there's land there with another landowner, I forget what, was it Three Dragons that identified land prices in Basingstoke? This place is a very profitable, very prosperous, nice place to live. That drives up house prices, it drives up land prices. And we've got to think about some very innovative ideas of how to get this land. It's the land that screws you when it comes down to building houses. The actual fabric of the house, to rebuild your house, Sean, do you know how much it would cost? I'll tell you, about £175,000. Well, no, but that's the, no, you don't care. You care about the economics, because that's what this is all about, is economics. You can build a 4-bedroom house for £200,000. But it's the land that gets you. That's where the cost is. So we can build affordable houses, but you can't build it on the cheap land that it needs to be for people to actually afford to live there, because, you know, the way that the world goes around in economics. So first priority, I would suggest, Chair, you know, this is something I'm going to throw on the table, is we need to really identify what land we're talking about within the borough. That's got to be near facilities. Otherwise, you're talking about building infrastructure, which puts up the cost of the developments. The second thing is the cost of land. We need to tease that out of a lot of reports that have been put before various committees of this council in the last sort of 3 or 4 years. Once you've got those two, then we can look at the individual construction. I'm very familiar with flat-pack housing, by the way, and some of it is very, very good and very economic to put up. But first, you've got to have the land. Thank you.
So perhaps we've got the wrong officers here, but one of the 2 items I mentioned at the beginning, page 6 of the whole pack, back in 15th of November 2009, the committee agreed in principle to officers drawing up a list of potential sites. And what became of that? I mean, I suspect it would have been property rather than housing officers. Yeah.
In addition to the STAR, Property Services did draw up a list of council-owned land. It was very, very small, and each of the sites was almost irrelevant in terms of the size of the piece of land that you could do anything with.
Thank you for that.
Well, with very great respect, firstly, one of the other reasons I want to say was Councillor Isaac has agreed already to dedicate 25 million of our investment portfolio to building council houses. So that's a sum of money, I think I remember correctly. So we know we have some money that he's already allocated that will be used to build housing for our affordable needs. Secondly, I'm afraid that I think that the previous councillor's analysis of the council housing portfolio is, I'm afraid, a complete nonsense. We have a policy in this council that land is released at 40% affordable homes. And the reason why we have rings run around us is because of narratives like that. Viability is completely meaningless because they can load it with infrastructural requirements which are completely unrelated. And to be honest with you, the land is worth 7.5 to 10 grand an acre, if truth be known. And we, as the council, because that's the agricultural value, and it's us that unlocks the value, the true value of the land. And it is And if we want, if there's a will, there's a way, always, and that is true. And we own Many Down. Many Down was bought for the specific and explicit purposes of building housing. It was bought with the money that came from the sale of the council houses. And to suggest that we are now not the true owner, when Hampshire County Council, I don't believe, has even paid their 50% of the option, is an outrage. And I hope that we're not going to go down that road of saying that we have no land available to build council houses in this borough, because it's a nonsense. And there's one other site that we have, which is the football stadium. I don't know why our council officers have allowed us to consider, if the stadium gets moved, which is a big if, why that is being considered as commercial real estate when that could be housing, and affordable housing could be built there as well. It's in our gift.
David Potter.
I mean, I'm very pleased, obviously, to hear what Councillor Cubitt says. I mean, it's normally my type of preamble, and I'm sure I'm boring people with saying it, but I want to comment on Manidan, because clearly I do disagree with Councillor Miller in regard to the commitment of our partners in respect of Manidan. Unless things have been said that I'm not aware of, the discussions with the other partners vis-a-vis the provision of housing on Manidan land hasn't started in the detail that we need to start. And Manidan trustees, to my knowledge, haven't turned their face against the true provision of social housing. In fact, 20 years ago, when I was involved directly with the purchase of Manidan at the time, I mean, that was the social commitment that was made at the time. I know the trustees have changed, but even if that was the case, we by definition are 25% owners of the land in question. And if we approach the building of houses on Manidan like any other commercial developer, so be it. That will be an approach we develop. We've got to get maximum return. Words like viability start to creep into the vocabulary, and I again agree with Councillor Cubitt, it's a nonsense because it's a subjective term. But if we say, as a council, this is our commitment to do with this land what we bought it for in the first place, and we have the money to do that, we can insist on that. We can make sure proper council housing provision is made there at a Basingstoke socially provided rent structure that will meet the needs of people that Councillor Edwards relates to. I think really true rented properties, council housing in the form that I used to know it, and it's not dirty language to talk in those terms. I know it's gone out the vocabulary again, and affordable housing means nothing, does it? What's affordable to me isn't affordable to somebody else, and all the rest of it. And we've got to get back to, I think, the real language of social housing provision, council house provision at Basingstoke affordable rent. We could do it at Manidan, and if we can't do it there, I've said it ad nauseum, we won't be able to do it anywhere. And as far as I know, and I had a representative of Hampshire County, for what it is worth, I realise not an elected member, saying, as far as the cabinet member was concerned in Hampshire County, there was no reluctance to saying the original spirit of the agreement is still maintained. Hampshire County is signed up to that, and I think the trustees would be as well. So we have great prospects there if we go about this the right way. We've got the money, we can pump prime these things, and we've got the land. There's not going to be a better opportunity than that, and I think we need to do some real work on that in a way that nobody has done up to date.
Terry Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's quite clear that there will be a divide within the committee in terms of council housing and whether we should even be talking about providing council housing or not. There's clearly a fundamental divide in terms of what people actually believe, whether we should still be even talking about it, whether we should be providing council housing or not. That's something that we're not going to agree on, clearly, and I'm not even sure, with the greatest of respect, that it is actually a policy discussion that we should be having in scrutiny. I think that's a policy decision that isn't for this committee. That's my opinion. In terms of the land that was referred to, we of course have small pockets of land. I'm not talking about many down here, which is an entirely separate issue. We've had small pockets of land that we could look at. We're all guilty, I think, as local councillors, of not wanting to have land that's close to us and close to our residents being built on. I could give examples of small areas of land which are perfect, if you like, in terms of being close to facilities and close to people in need, such as land at Southview. But for obvious reasons, local councillors don't want that built on, and we're all guilty of that. And that's one of the reasons why land hasn't been coming forward, and that's one of the problems that we've had. We have set aside 4.5 million in the medium-term financial strategy, which will be used for housing and homelessness. This gives us the opportunity to look at a number of different innovative schemes, which we're going to be looking at. We might be able to extend the ESP scheme that we've been running with Sentinel, which is obviously having an impact on helping to remove people from the waiting list. It'd be nice if we can expand that, if we can look at working with other partners on that. But it also gives us the opportunity to look at other ways of improving affordable housing delivery as well. And if you look at, as Councillor Cubitt rightly said, if you look at the projected figures for housing delivery, bearing in mind that the affordable housing delivery tends to actually follow general housing delivery, which has gone down recently, as we all know, because of a number of factors, including the changes to grants funding and the changes and the difficulties in the housing market as such. But if you project it forward, 2014-15, we're talking about delivery of 162 affordable homes, which is beginning to improve. And then we have the next 3 years, we have projection figures of 457, 461 and 311. So that is indeed above the targeted figure of 300, as Councillor Cubitt said. So the situation certainly hasn't been brilliant, but it is certainly improving. There are a number of reasons why that will be the case, and we're also doing a lot of work to try to improve it ourselves and to be proactive. We've set aside those funds. We're looking at improving schemes. We're looking at working with partners. It isn't as if the work isn't happening, because it certainly is.
Can I say that this committee can talk about anything, even as it's about to be truncated, the terms of reference say that, but we have no power other than to make recommendations to the decision taker. It may be that we've got the wrong decision taker because we are talking about council property issues, but I don't think that's going to inhibit most of the members of this committee from saying what they believe is the right course on this. Speaking for myself, it seems to me we get things in the wrong order if we talk about whether we do or don't believe in council housing. I haven't heard anybody, any member of this council, in the 7 years I've been here, being against us building housing. The question as to whether they're built by the council or built by someone else on council land or elsewhere seems to me to come farther down the path. But what you said, Terry, makes me a little uneasy, because here we've got the evidence of all of us sitting around talking about it for a long time, and the key thing in the scope for this is early. How could we handle it early? Some people are suggesting many down. There's other land about if there's money to buy it. I dare say some of the people who are flying flags with the local plan and not actually thinking of building there themselves, they're going to take the money and run. So there are, I think, lots of options. But the only thing we can do is make recommendations to you or your colleagues. But don't please question our right to discuss everything.
Councillor James.
Gavin James.
I'm speaking again. Well, I only introduced, I didn't speak. Do you really want to go first? I don't mind, I can. Well, I've got the red light.
The chair's just reading off a list, and Gavin's the next one on it.
I was really going to come back on some of Councillor Miller's points. I think we've already covered. Obviously, we do have a list of land that's available for housing in terms of the SHLA, and obviously within that is all the council land, particularly brownfield sites that have been subject to no scrutiny or consideration at all. They're in there because they're within the local sort of development area. In terms of Manydown, my understanding is that the developers are ourselves and Hampshire County Council. The trustees are not. From my understanding of the deal is, as long as we act in a rational and lawful way, and I'm sure we would, we've just got to develop it into such and they will obviously get some profit from that, but actually they're not a developer, they're not have any developer rights. That we've just got to make sure that we prove to them we've done the best possible to make sure that we've delivered what we said we'd deliver, and they get some sort of returns. Hence you can't hide it for 16 years and not do anything with it. but they're quite relaxed. They don't actually have any control over whether we decide to deliver more affordable or anything else. In terms of the cost of land, it is always difficult, and of course we don't own lots of the land that's in the Slough and around, but the cost of building is actually a lot different to what Councillor Miller outlined. A company called Bauhaus, who I think are Swedish, but I'm really guessing, and I apologise to them if they're not, they can provide us with 145 metre squared, 2-storey accommodation, a 3-bedroom house for £52,000. That can be delivered in 6 weeks if you want to place your order now. You'll have to pay on top for obviously having it installed and plumbing, and I'm guessing getting those containers from Sweden will cost you a couple of grand. But for about 70 grand, we could be building 3-bedroom houses in the borough, but it would take 6 weeks for them to be delivered. And that's why I don't understand, not just why we're not doing it, but also when private developers come up, private landowners come up and say we want to develop our sites, we don't turn around and say, well, can you provide some housing on that basis? Not just for social rent, but also for sale, because some of the people that Councillor Edwards was talking about would actually love to buy a house. They want to buy a whole house. I'm really, really lucky, I feel, because I bought my house for what now looks like a ridiculous amount of money. I've never earned a great deal of money, but I bought my house for £60,000. And I wasn't a high earner, but that was it. And now, I mean, poor Laura's going to be really jealous because she's going to have to pay treble the amount for a house of the same sort of size and quality. And so we can actually deliver cheaper houses if we use modern technology and start dictating a bit more to developers about the kind of houses we want and the kind of prices we want them to come out at, rather than be driven by developers deciding what houses they want to build, building them and saying that's how much they cost. We've got to start providing housing truly affordable, and at every level, as Councillor Harvey said, whether it's social rent or whether it's a rent or to buy, we have to provide housing that people locally can afford. And otherwise, we're in a very dangerous situation. The population of Basingstoke is ageing massively. Our estates are filled up from the London overspill people that are now in their 60s. We're struggling to get a workforce together to keep the town going, because as people retire, we're not replacing them with school leavers. And then we find that people like teachers, people like police officers, firemen, nurses are priced out of Basingstoke. They deliver a critical service to local people, and if we don't have housing for them to afford, then they will work elsewhere, and then we'll have a shortage in those areas. And it's a real scary situation that a population that will need a lot more care because of the age they're reaching, and yet care workers won't be able to afford to live in Basingstoke. So it's a massively important issue we need to address. And I think we need to go beyond having schemes in the pipeline. I think we always risk complacency when we have an economic good time and we just scrape above our target, knowing that inevitably there will be another economic bad time when we fall drastically below our target and miss it by sort of 200 homes. We should always be looking for continuous improvement and exploring all the opportunities. Flat pack housing, container housing, whatever you want to call it, new build technologies are a really, really important tool that to date we have not used at all. Whether that's working with a private sector home provider, whether it's with RSLs, we're just not even looking at it. Other areas are, and we're well behind the curve. And I think it's an opportunity that's not in our current policy, and we need to explore why we're not doing it. What are the barriers to doing that? Because otherwise we're going to have another policy, another document, £4 million in the bank that we don't actually spend. And as we already know, we got 106 monies from the Weber's garage development, £750,000 left over for affordable homes for elderly residents. But I can't think where the hell that scheme's going to be built. When are we ever going to be able to spend that money? It could sit there for 10 years before I think we're allowed to spend it on any. 5 years, and then we can spend it on any social housing. But actually, prices of those, you could build bungalows for £15,000, £20,000 and move people in 6 weeks' time if you've got a plot of land to do it on. And why aren't we doing it?
Your last phrase was if we got the land, and I think that is something we've really got to think about. Sean.
Thank you, Chair. I realise the figures projected forward for social housing goes from 162 to 457 next year. I just want to put a word of warning here, a note of caution. We have never met our target, okay? So we're always going to fall below those targets, so don't rely on that. Can I just say, this council has hundreds of millions of pounds in the bank. And those hundreds of millions of pounds in the bank, most of it is in secure investments. Currently, that means very low rate of return. The rate of return averages currently 2%. 2%. If we spent 100 million pounds and created a company and shared it with a builder, don't have to call it council housing. I know that would be a shocking thing to do, but you could call it other form of housing. You could call it anything you want. You could build houses and get a return of at least 5%. And you could start doing that on Down next year. I mean, really next year. We could start doing that in Down next year. What happens? Down is dependent on us to do a lot of the work, and Hampshire County Council is running in tandem with us, and we're working together to develop Down. The trustees are not putting any obstacles in the way. All they're waiting for is their share of the loot, and they will get it. So we do have 2,000 acres, and we can and should be able to build on it. And we should design a company for ourselves to do our job, to build houses cheaply, to rent to people who that in a rent that they can afford. That can be done. Now, there are pockets of land around the place. One of them being mentioned, which is where the football ground is now. We don't own that land. We own a strip of it. Right? We don't own that land. If we did, they'd still have sold it. Because there's no interest from some quarters on building proper housing or social housing in Southampton. There's no interest. We, the councillors, have made representation till the cows come home that that land should not be commercial, it should be residential. And we have argued that we need to stop building commercial outside of town, because the town centre is going to close down in the end if we put shops and matters of that nature outside of town. If you walk through town tomorrow, you will find that there are not hundreds, there are quite a few shops currently vacant and empty. So where there's a will, there's a way. And what I'm suggesting is already being done in some boroughs in London. It's already being done. It's not new, it doesn't have to be invented. It's already in place. Thank you, bye-bye.
Now, we've got 4 professional officers sitting here. If we have any questions for them, I think that they should come. And if we haven't, we should invite them to go somewhere else. Colin Regan.
All right, thank you. I'm getting a bit tired now, but yeah, I mean it's council housing's the answer. If we don't like the name council housing, our opponents, I would say call it public housing. That's what it used to be called. And going back to system-built houses, Nye Bevan, while he was building the health service, built houses as well. They were called prefabs, and some are still standing today, actually. Yeah, prefabs. There were Princess Crest, and I can take you around Southampton and show you them as well. And when I grew up in London, South London, all the bomb sites, there were loads, and they were great. There was a will. It was post-war. There was a will. There was a major housing crisis. There's a will. Well, we got away from, and then the Town and Country Planning Acts and overspill. And I'm a beneficiary of council housing. I would advocate. My parents got a flat in central London down there and got an house, and we moved on and prospered, and eventually bought a place. And that was the process. But now we seem to have gone this since the sell-off of council housing. It's like, you know, the most thing in life is to buy your own house. Alongside that, the prices have risen, so have rents, especially since the buy-to-let. And so we get around to silly things, talk like affordable housing and social housing. It's called public housing, and have a rent that people can afford. And once they move on, the children grow up or get a bit more money there, their pocket, they can go on and buy an house. This obsession with house prices and actually feeding private landlords the obscene amounts of availability is not, I mean, it's not the tenants that are burdening the welfare state, it's the private landlords. The people bought to let, they're making a killing because of Esseltine in 1980 did away with rent controls. And we started selling council houses. So council houses are a positive thing. It was not negative. It did not mean bricked up graffiti and boarded up houses. The people like Sean and I and others benefited. It was a proper house, 3 bedrooms, not flats, 3 bedrooms, a downstairs toilet, because you used to build into a certain standard, which Thatcher did away with. So left it to the market, but the market doesn't want to build downstairs toilets. So they got smaller and smaller and smaller, so they're quite pocket sized. So I would say, don't run away from council housing. It's the answer. We need a major radical housing programme, because prices in Basingstoke are never going to go down because of the pressure. Living 50 miles from the centre of London, 50 minutes on the train, Heathrow, Gatwick, major infrastructure, and all the IT companies all in the southeast of England. We're never going to get away from having high house prices, but we can control rented housing.
I would like to move towards a recommendation or some questions. The next speaker is Laura Edwards.
Thank you. Can I just ask, sorry, Councillor Reid, you say we've got affordable housing coming up. What is it? Is it going to be shared ownership, or is it going to be a mixture?
We've got the protective figures which I mentioned to you. We've got 162 this year, 457, 2015, 16, and 461, 2016, 17. I don't know whether Di can elucidate on what form that takes. But
We have got some of the details scheme by scheme. It could be that as a development is phased, that different parts of the development are built at different times. So it might be the private market housing is built first, or shared ownership is built first, or the affordable rented is built first. So going forward into the future, the figures become a little bit more uncertain. But certainly we could provide for 2014-15 according to what we already know.
But I think so this is something I feel quite strongly about. Is that that's the thing. I think people say, oh, the prices are going up and everything, but I think, just an example, say someone is on £20,000, the maximum, and this is on a good day, they could borrow would be 100k for their mortgage. If you're looking at a 1-bed flat, 130 plus all the fees, you need £35,000 lump sum. And that is the problem for young people. We need people to come to this town, and it's almost impossible. And I feel that, okay, we've got the social rents, and yes, they are needed, but I think we also need to identify this gap of people who are, 20,000 is not a brilliant salary, but it's reasonable for young people. When I was house hunting, I came across a scheme in Sheffield Park, and I was actually told that the units that came up, the housing associations weren't interested in them. And then because of that, they were put on the market at 75% of the purchase price, and then the 25% was in a lease. So when you sell that property, you get 75% back. I didn't take that offer up, but it was a brilliant opportunity, and I feel that maybe we could look at something like that. So it's not social housing, it's not social rent, but it's for people who want to buy their properties, who don't have that big deposit, because 35 grand's a lot of money. And I think that just sort of hits that missing group. Is that something that we could look to do, or?
The simple answer is it's within members' gift. If you decide you want to target a particular group of people to assist them, you can make that decision, but you need to have the funds to go with it, because it will come at a cost. But that's a decision that's within your gift.
But if, say, a £200,000 house, so they pay 150 deposit, mortgage, whatever, we've got that £50,000 investment in that property, and say if it was to sell double, we would make another 50,000. So everybody, is that not a winning formula?
As I say, it's within your gift. There are schemes like that could be worked up, but you as members need to decide which groups of people you want to assist. Currently, we've got a list of need definitions that's attached to our allocations policy. But if as members there are other groups of people you wish to assist, that's within your gift. But it does come at a price. Therefore, there needs to be resources made available to fund those decisions that you may wish to make.
For the record, Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It follows on in some ways from Councillor Edwards' comment. This document here talks about our projection of dwellings. Throughout the documents, it refers to dwellings per annum, and the target's always been 300. But then you categorise the housing register into 5 bands, and I've got this terrible sympathy for the poor old single people that actually represent 47% on 1 year of those on the register. And I had no idea this thing called sofa surfing existed. And so you felt desperately sorry that these people, well, I always thought that was when you went out on a Saturday night and you used a mate place. No, I know. So we talk about 300 DPA, but how does that relate to these 5 bands of people? So how do we know that we're fulfilling what need?
Just for clarification,
Yeah.
the target in the housing strategy is at least 300 homes per annum. So that's a minimum delivery target. And in terms of how it stretches across different bands, the bands vary according to household type. So there's almost like different separate lists for each household types. You won't get single people queuing up against families, for example, because they're competing for different types of accommodation. So what will impact on their chances for housing is what mix and what type of property is built within the affordable bounty at the end of the negotiations, if you like.
It just struck me that where we say we want housing for the most needy in the areas that they need it, the areas are going to be very different if you're a single person wanting access to social facilities as opposed to the family that wants to be quite remote but have some transport.
And I think as the last EPH committee realised, need is a relative concept, or can be a relative concept, in terms not only of how you define it but also how you measure it.
Now, I think there's 2 things we can do. We can do one of them or both, and that is to move to a recommendation to a decision taker, perhaps, or, as we did with the previous item, divide some further work that is going to be done across committee. But the next person to speak is Paul Harvey. Perhaps if we can stop furiously agreeing with each other about the need.
Well, I know you say that, Chair, but in 1 quarter, we're not agreeing. And I think this is really important that we do have this debate around this table. And you were right that it's the right place to have this debate because of what's been said this evening. And I hope that we can agree, because it's very interesting to listen. I mean, I said my piece first, and I've sat listening to what everybody else has said. Whichever way you cut this in Basingstoke, there is an housing crisis. All right? There is a housing crisis. It affects people that want to buy because there are not the homes to buy that are affordable. No way about it. 10, 12 years now living in Basingstoke, trying to find a house that I could afford on my own with a rent, trying to find a house I can afford in terms of a mortgage. I totally understand where you're coming from, What really I do. And we ain't the only ones, not by any stretch of the imagination. all of those others, as you say, Councillor Faulkner, who are sofa surfing, who are trapped at home, who are living at home with their parents now into their 30s because they can't afford. There is a housing crisis for that group of people. There is a housing crisis for the priority need that Kate and Tracy identify, because there aren't enough houses for those who are in priority need on the register, let alone those who have the aspiration to want to buy. There is a housing crisis for all of those people who are renting, who are sofa surfing through houses of multiple occupation, who get up in the morning and go to work, and somebody else climbs into bed during the day because they then go out to work overnight. That's a reality we're now seeing in Basingstoke. I thought that was a reality we did away with a long time ago, but that's a reality we're now seeing back in Basingstoke, and it's to do with that private rented sector. We're seeing an issue with the landlords raising rents to levels that people can't afford to continue to pay the rent. They then come along to the council, and we wound up paying housing benefit to that private landlord, and that private landlord says thank you very much because that goes into their pocket. The way that housing benefit is working in this town is a real issue in the way that our policy is set to drive people into the private rented sector because we haven't got the stock in the first place to house them. Whose fault is that? Where does the fault lie in not providing them? Because we're building houses, we're building hundreds of houses, we've got thousands on the books to build. But who do they truly are they being built for? You're right, we want economic growth. Well, there comes a consequence of having economic growth. That means you've got to build the homes for the people that want to come here and work, or who live here, who would like to buy to stay here to work. This all wraps up in a very complicated situation that I think we've all spoken about tonight. And we're all passionate about it. But there's an ideological point that's been made tonight that disturbs me. We don't want council houses. We would have a fundamental disagreement over the building of council houses. With all due respect to both Councillor Reid as a councillor here and a cabinet member, but also to others who have heard similar things from in the past, and other Councillor Reid as well. I sat there and had the same, exactly the same debate with, sat around this table. Other councils, Tory, Labour, Lib Dem, joint, no overall control, have all bit the bullet over the past few years. But unless you start to intervene as a local authority, using the mechanisms you have at your disposal, land, the ability, like Gavin says, to bring somebody in who could deliver low-cost housing in the right way by making them a preferred partner, as you say, Councillor, is a good option. The ability to actually work with RSLs who have got money, the ability to work with the HCA in terms of what their expectations are on regeneration and what their expectations are of the standards of housing. Unless you start to pull all of that together, and we're the only ones that can do it. As a local authority, we are the only ones who can have the capacity to knit all of this together to deliver. And we ain't delivering. I'm sorry, but we're just not delivering. So to be constructive, Chair, we have got £25 million sat in capital that one of the cabinet members has set aside for future investment. I'd like to see that directed in a way that could be constructive to this agenda. I think in terms of priority need, we have got to start working more constructively with our RSLs in terms of what they build and the rents they charge it out at. Absolutely crucial. How we tackle our private rented sector has got to be a massive part of policy, because we ain't dealing with the private rented sector at the moment. We're allowing it to run riot because we're too afraid to deal with it. And it isn't political. This doesn't really have to be political. It's political if you make it political. It's political if you make it ideological. This is just common sense for the way people are living, and I think Laura's really expressed that tonight. The way people are actually living and what they're going through. We all know it because we all see it. So I think the question for us, Chair, is how do we go about doing a piece of work as a scrutiny committee that enables us, with officers' help, to identify what the problems are in the delivery of housing in Basingstoke, such that then the EPH committee can look at delivery mechanisms. We don't want strategies. We don't want long written out bits of paper. What we want is how do we work with a joint partner, joint this or ourselves, to deliver and use some of that money that might actually give us a return on investment that will plug some of the financial holes we have. £4.5 million in a homeless fund is welcome for homelessness. It ain't going to fix the housing crisis. £25 million of investment by this council would be a start in trying to do something either through land or through investment in building itself in a way that was very well thought through to deliver. So, Chair, you're looking for constructive ways forward. Let's actually get the right people sat around this table with us to have that conversation about what the problems are. Let's hand it to EPH or work together with EPH to get the delivery mechanisms. We've already had Gavin's flat pack housing. That's a very positive, actionable thing that we can look to. The other thing is, I think, the 25 million and delivery mechanisms, joint ventures, and how other councils of all political persuasions are actually solving this conundrum. We're way behind the curve. So I'm sorry, Terry, I know what you said, I do appreciate what you said politically, but ideologically, fundamentally, it isn't that. This has got to be more about delivery and meeting people's real needs in this town.
Paul, everybody's got to leave their ideology behind, not just one side of the argument if we're going to deal with this. I detected a proposal there in the middle of all of that. I detected a proposal there, and I'd like us to talk about that proposal rather than either agreeing about the need or disagreeing about ideology from now on. And the proposal was that this committee should promote a working group, a task and finish group. I've learned a new phrase. That is going to investigate within this council what obstacles there are and how they can be removed. And we've had mention of land, we've had a mention of money, we've had a mention of flat pack housing, other things. We have a committee that has housing explicitly in its brief, and it wasn't a mistake that I invited Paul to be a member of the scoping committee for this. And of course, we have not only a cabinet member with housing in a brief, but we have a cabinet member with property in his brief. And I think that what Paul has proposed, shaved down a bit, it would involve all of those parties. Bad word. People, institutions, obstacles, or whatever. So I understand you want to say something, Terry.
Just wanted to clarify a couple of things, actually. To go back quite a long way, Sean made a comment about we've never met our targets. We did. In fact, we met them as recently as 2011, 2012. We met them. Yeah, so we have regularly, and prior to that, we were meeting our targets. We've only had a blip in the last few years. So, also, someone, it may have been Sean again, sorry, Sean, but someone was talking about spending reserves and that we have a lot of money and we should be spending it. Let's just remember that the reason that we have the reserves is to enable us to be the fundamentally secure financial council that we have been for a number of years. And, sorry, may I finish? May I finish? Thank you. And as a result of that, we've had a continuous council tax freeze. We are retaining our frontline services, and we're reaching levels of quite unprecedented satisfaction levels amongst our residents in the recent residents survey, which I think is. I'm sorry, Chair. Yeah.
Please let's hear the cabinet on that. But after all we can do is make recommendations to cabinet.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I haven't finished, Gavin. May I finish? Thank you, Chair. Also, I think we do need to be mindful, those people who are keen for us to take on council housing, and there are certainly a number of members who are, that we take on a huge financial and social commitment when we do that, and we have to be absolutely clear about where that would be taking us as council, where that would be taking us financially as well as in terms of building and so on. And if you look at, there's been reference to some councils who are doing that now. I've just got one example, for example, Newham, and that has arisen because it was actually on Radio 4 yesterday. So I had just a very brief look at that. They are doing the kind of scheme that some members have mentioned, where it's purportedly for investment, but they're also building council homes. Newham have something like, if I can find the right piece of paper, in spite of what they're doing, in spite of the council house building, they have something like 14,000 households on the waiting list, more than 600 empty homes, and they've also had a recent protest where mothers took over, single mothers who couldn't find a home in Newham took over a derelict, an empty council estate, which Newham currently isn't regenerating. So let's just be aware that council housing is not a be-all and end-all, and it creates its own problems as well. And particularly if we want to be a financially secure council, as we are at the moment. But obviously, I'm happy to hear whatever committee recommends.
Gavin and then me.
It was just over submission you made. The survey, the resident survey, with 94% very, very satisfied. Could you just tell me exactly how many people of no fixed abode and sofa surfers who aren't registered at any particular address responded to that survey?
As you know, Councillor James, our homeless numbers in this council, our actual homeless on the street, have not changed in years. And if you talk to people from Maid Place and so on, it isn't increasing. We're still at the level we have been for years.
Can I have a little go? I've got a confession to make that I took great glee in the embarrassment that our administration got into over a Costa Coffee House. I did actually start explaining to people in my ward that this was not in competition with sports centres and so on. It was actually an investment, but I stopped because I found it rather amusing. But in fact, I think what some people are suggesting is that exactly as it was a good profitable investment to invest some of our money in a coffee house, so it could be a good profitable investment to invest in housing. Now that isn't necessarily council housing. A little advertisement, the London Borough of Sutton has reverted to the committee system of working, and within that I think it's been described as Dark Ages method. They are raising a massive amount of money in joint ventures to provide housing. So, but please let's leave talk of council housing and not council housing out of this, because whatever scheme is feasible can be funded in different ways. And then we have a different hunt for the funding. But if we're going to get into ideological discussions before we even set pen to paper, let alone lay a single brick, we're not going to get anywhere. And so nothing in this meeting is an attack on the administration or you, and nor I hope is anything in this meeting an attack on what Anara and Bevan did in 1946. We've got today to find ways of going forward. So I know only you are listed to speak, but what I really want now is comments on the proposition that this committee initiates a task group to look into the question of why we're not doing it and how can we do it early.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much. My follow-on was completely perfect, not contrived or anything, to what Councillor Harvey said, and is absolutely in adherence to your request, which is that I've worked out that with the 25 million, and I made a reference to this at the very beginning of this topic, about the 880 that we ended up basically only ending up with 17 units with homelessness and 7 units. With this very well put together paper in March 2012, when Councillor Golding was portfolio holder, there were 6 options. And I have just sat here calculating, if we've got 25 million from Councillor Isert, because we all talk in generalities, but actually why don't we talk specifics? And it's really interesting when you look at specifics. 25 million from Councillor Isert, 4.5 million that Councillor Reid's got in her portfolio to help afford homes for affordable needs. And then we've got the 750 from Webbers. And I've just done a quick back of the envelope calculation. And if we went for the first option on page 87, everybody, if we went for the first option on 87, which is maximising the total number of new affordable rented homes delivered. Obviously, it's 2 years ago, but I don't think we've had major inflation at the moment, so the number should be relatively comparable today. With the monies of the 25 million plus the 4.5 million plus 750 from Webbers Section 106, we could build 1,835 houses on Priority 1. And Priority 2, we could build 1,502 of those houses. And Priority 3, we could build 500 bungalows for elderly in our borough, which we know is a real problem area. And in rural housing, if we spend all of that on this, I mean, obviously, we would do a mix.
But my point is just to demonstrate with numbers. We could build 999 in the rural on that calculation. Finally, on the final option of the 884, because I just did the multiples, with 61 bed or 42 beds, with the 1 bed units, we could build 1,998 units. Okay, that's from the 25 million, 4.5 million, and the 750. That should be our proposal tonight to the Cabinet. We have the money dedicated already for affordable homes. We've had the work done already, so there's no need to go and have another meeting, because I respect you hugely, Councillor Watts, but you do, I think, like and on the side of always calling a meeting. Why don't we say we've got all the evidence, if we have the will, we've got the money, let's go and buy some land or allocate some of the many down land that will be the 40%, and let's build these 1,835 homes or 1,502 homes or 500 homes or 999 homes or 1,998 homes. Resolve the 5-year plan problem as well on the affordable homes, because it's way in excess.
Appropriately enough, I'm calling Paul Miller next.
Thank you, Chair. Bit of background by some of you not on my committee. I cancelled the 13th of November meeting, and I said, oh yes, knew what to do. Thank you, Sean. And I sent out an email to the members of the committee, to the 2 chairs and the portfolio holders that were involved. What I'm suggesting is a scoping panel, joint scoping panel between this committee and my own committee be convened in the near future, is the words I said, for scoping out the housing delivery mechanisms. And that's exactly what we're talking about around this table this evening. There are a lot of options. The point of that scoping exercise would be to focus on what we really need to achieve. There is no point round the table, and I'll go back to what you said earlier, Chair, that when we start getting into kind of details, we're not going to do it at this kind of committee. We probably won't be able to do it for another couple of committee cycles, because we need to look very carefully at what we're letting ourselves in for. Ourselves, I'm talking about members, I'm talking about the officers, I'm talking about this council, about how we drive this forward. There's a lot of positives in what's being said around the table tonight. And I'm not getting into ideology because it's unnecessary. We're looking at mechanisms. A mechanism is a process. You and I know what process is, don't we? That's what we need to identify, and I think we can, in a relatively small group, and we've done it before, haven't we, guys? That we can actually get down to the nitty-gritty of what we want to achieve. That we then take that through. And I think that's the positive way forward. That's the suggestion, Chair. You saw my email. I think I copied you into it. And I go back to, we know where we're going to start from, is land. And yes, I take all the points about money down. I'm not going to go there again. Maybe that's, I'm building on what Paul said. And it's not meeting after meeting. We're going through the process, and we can move things forward, which is what we're looking to. And we can actually point that straight at the Cabinet. And ultimately, I think this is going to be so important, it's going to go to Council.
Just in response to Lee, if I was a Führer of this council, I would say let's do this now. But because I'm not, I think we ought to have a meeting.
Power, Chairman. So we can only give, we have no power. So all we can do is give recommendations or advice or vote on something which goes to the Cabinet, who then makes their decision. And they're perfectly at liberty in this administration to then refuse to meet it. But Councillor Godison just said very briefly that the purpose of this agenda item is the provision of low-cost housing. And that, what I've just described, which is working on what a whole host of people have been working on tonight, is absolutely some way in which we could meet it in its simplistic form. Of course, it's incredibly simplistic, and of course, lots of things going to have to be fleshed out. But we already have the Councillor Isaac's already agreed, and the council's already approved 25 million being invested in low-cost housing being built, and the stock sitting with us, and us generating 5% revenue, which is more than the 2% on our investment bond portfolio, which is what I do not believe council should be involved with anyways. I think it should be involved with council houses, not portfolio bond portfolio.
Godin hasn't spoken yet.
c-
Councillor Godin, do you still want to speak? Not Godin, sorry, Godison.
Hang on a minute, I'm in the chair.
Sorry.
Now, Paul Miller at the towards the end of his statement there said it begins with land, and that concurs entirely with my view, and I think that's the theme that's run through this meeting. In fact, through the scope, we get flat pack houses to build on council land, but we've heard from the officers that it was a bit difficult to scratch together some land. So I am extremely warm to Paul's suggestion that we do have a meeting, that Paul will lead the meeting, and members of this committee should take part in it. So Paul, well, I suggest that you call it a task and finish group. It's here because we all expect you to finish, and perhaps come up with something more than the scoping group did. Are you happy for me to ask who at this meeting would like to take part in that? So who in this meeting would like to, well, what a surprise. So we have Councillors Harvey and James taking part in that. Yes, no, so sorry, you were saying it should be joints, and this is our side. Okay. I think that's it's an extremely variable view of the committee if you dig down a bit, but the fact that it's asking for some early action and it begins with looking for land, I think is appropriate. And you can come in and propose the Camrose site if you want to, or even the Old Common perhaps. So that's what we will do. And Councillor Reid has heard what we've said. It's just possible that she'll disclose that to Councillor Isett, and I imagine that your task and finish group will want to talk to both of those, Paul. Is that right? It's, I've got a long list of people who wanted to speak, and I'm not going to allow any more. Can I say that I have failed?
I had a question to the Cabinet Member, Chair, rather than actually a comment.
Well, okay. I have failed in that the Constitution says it's my responsibility to make sure we finish within 3 hours, and I failed. And we have some more items on our agenda. So Paul wants to ask you a question. We'll have that, and then we won't let the committee services people go, but we'll invite the other officers to leave. Democratic Service. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask this question on the basis of what the Cabinet Member said. Could the Cabinet Member confirm for me that in the projected budget, we are in fact looking at a £2 million deficit in the projected budget, even on the basis of a 2% rise in council tax?
I'm going to rule that out of order. It's not a subject to this meeting. That item with the agenda is closed. Now the next item is the performance panel update. The minutes of the performance panel, which serves as a report, is way back on the agenda at page 83 of 88. And I'm going to invite the chairman of the performance panel, Sean Keating, to introduce it.
Thank you, Chair. In view of the hour and my normal brevity, I'll take about 2 minutes of your time. Right. The performance panel obviously looks at a whole range of factors, and the process that we have agreed previously, and which I'm currently operating, is of all of the items, you've got all of the papers that we had at the performance panel, and so I'm just highlighting 3 items out of that lot. The first item I'm highlighting is item D on page 383, the Environment Agency monitoring. That's not yet finished, so I'm just bringing it to your attention. That's now done. The second item that I want to bring to your attention is item E on the same page, the bottom of the page, broadband issues. The report we got really was we couldn't get the information because there was contractual issues with BT and Openreach, should I say, in terms of letting us know the broadband coverage. It's still not a finalized item, but you need to understand what's happening there. And the last item I want to bring to your attention is item E on page 85, the final item of the agenda, and that's our continuing concern about the impact of Hampshire County Council cuts into supporting people's service. We know that the impact is to close some existing buildings which provide sheltered or other form of accommodation to younger people, mostly women. So, and we have a building of this nature in our patch, which is actually empty now. It's empty, not providing any accommodation to anyone, and it's empty. It's crazy, absolutely crazy, when there's a need. When there's a need. But apart from that, I've got nothing to say, Chair. Thank you.
Any questions for Councillor Keating? Yes, Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Sean, that particular building you just mentioned, now that comes under care, doesn't it? It's a health, how can I put it? It's maybe residential, but doesn't come under a housing issue, does it? I think it comes under the care, adult social care. That's the expression I was looking for.
The answer to your question is it's owned by a housing association who have chosen to empty it before April next year, which is when most of the cuts are supposed to take impact, who have chosen to empty it and have not yet told us, because we have asked, what they intend to do with it. I don't believe it comes under the definition of health or care in the same sense you mean. I don't believe so. I may be wrong. Yeah, I believe so.
Sean, are you recommending this committee to do anything about it?
I'm recommending that they take note of the issues and the concerns and to raise them in the appropriate committee as we go forward. Thank you.
Okay. You've got the whole of the performance report, and we made sure this time that the red, ambers and green are actually in colour, because I thought distributing... Yes, Sean has finished. Does anyone want to raise any issues at all on the performance report? Paul Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Just to point out, and I think it should be recorded for the minutes, same as last time round, if you look at the projections, even here on the key 10 homelessness, 4 of the 6 indicators are still in the red, and they're only for this particular quarter, only this part of the year, let alone we will be at the end of the year in the final review of the process. So I do think it's important that we actually acknowledge and recognise that of all the indicators, if you go to page 43 of 88 and 44 of 88, that singular red mark against K10 actually transforms, when you go into the detail, into a significant number of red markers. And I think we should recognise that and bring it as a concern.
Any other comments? Emily?
I mean, you'll see in the notes that I made a request for the total cost of the Manydown thing, and I got a reply from Philip, but it's not complete. And one of the reasons why I asked the question is because we've got given in the papers for this time round that I think just two, what are they called? You know, when they two appeals to our council cost us, the council, 350,000, and only one was a large appeal. And that was a cost that was not anticipated and is a real cost to us. And we've never been told the cost of the Manydown fiasco, and the cost that I've been given from Philip Hood was not even 350, which I find odd that this one small housing estate that there was an appeal for has cost us 350, and this other much bigger issue seems to be equivalent costs. So I've got some more costs coming in.
And what are we going to do with this information when we have it? Thank you for the performance panel report. I've now buried my agenda. Oh, I'm holding it in my hand. So, forgive me. Yes, I've got to report on discussions I had with the Constitutional Working Party. Have moved on a bit. You might all remember that I sent an email to all councillors the day after the first session of our only call-in so far, and I was very concerned at the way things have materialised, but I also wanted to emphasise that it's to the full council that I account, and that will be. Now, at my request, the Constitutional Working Party met and have agreed in principle to some amendments which are in the process of being documented, or they've been documented and not yet agreed. The key change is that rather than saying that I have to call a meeting within 7 working days of a call-in request, that will now say 15 working days. I mean, in the event, as soon as we realised that you have to give 5 working days notice of a meeting, the 7 working days was daft, to use a technical term. And so that has been, it's being recommended that it should change to 15 working days. Now that will give us not only time to organise the meeting and consult people. I mean, one member complained that the signatories hadn't been consulted, but there were only 2 evenings it could possibly have been, and one of those we had a scheduled meeting of this committee. It will also give us time for people to sit down and talk to each other. And I expect, as chair of scrutiny, to sit with the signatories to a call-in to talk through entirely mechanisms, not to persuade or dissuade anyone in any direction at all, the mechanisms that we're going to follow to make sure it's a successful event, and also to sit with the decision taker and anyone that he or she intends to involve to have the same discussion, possibly for them all to meet together. That was floated as an idea, and it was opposed as an idea, and the option will be there. I'll sit and talk with anybody, basically, and in that way we should approach the call-in meeting, if we ever have any more, by already having identified the information we want. So we're not. I don't ever want again to adjourn a meeting on the basis that we haven't got the information we need. And that's a good idea to take some time deciding what we need and then get it. I have to say, on that occasion, the officers did come up with an abundance of information in time, and I read all of it before watching you all on the webcast. So that's the main change. I've actually suggested another relevant change, but as that hasn't been discussed yet, I won't say that was. The whole of the rest of it really is changes in behaviour. We don't want a constitution that enforces behaviour that's dysfunctional. And the signatories will be invited to sit down, for example, which there was no requirement of that before. The chair will have the discretion to do what Sean as vice chairman did, invite the signatories to speak at the end or ask questions at the end. And I intend, and I think Sean does as well, to exercise quite a lot of discretion according to what common sense tells us what to do. And so that's that. At the same time, I asked the Constitutional Working Party to review the remit of this committee. Now, the reason for that was I'm one of these irritating people who reads the Constitution and thinks it means what it says, and that's going to happen. Nobody other than me seems to have read that this committee was responsible for the whole of the portfolio holder for property finance and commissioning. And the Constitutional Working Party are rather horrified to discover it says that, I think. And their intention is to take that away from us. Now, what they're going to do with it, I don't agree with, but as an individual councillor, I shall have that argument. As chairman of Scrutiny, I give that up willingly, and we possibly won't have to have 12 meetings a year. On the other hand, we did at our first meeting challenge, or I mean the committee did, against my advice, challenged and rejected the idea that we should do pre-scrutiny of the budget. Now, I was a bit inconsistent on that because, of course, if we were responsible for scrutinising the whole of that portfolio holder, then the budget had to come within it. This myth that we only look backwards is obviously slightly wrong when we're told we're going to scrutinise the new budget before it goes to the council. But I have accepted that it was always the intention of the Constitutional Working Party that this committee should scrutinise the budget. In fact, I think the intention was that it should just be the performance panel. But we've dealt with that, haven't we? And so I will be putting into the work programme a scrutiny of the budget. Exactly how that comes in or goes on is yet to be determined. I am going to meet as soon as possible with Kevin Jacquest to understand from him why he feels there's a pressing need for it to happen and how we go about it. I find it very difficult to see how we can scrutinise the budget without getting into talking about the spending priorities and investment priorities and so on. And but to do that without getting party political is going to be extremely difficult. But so I've accepted the thing in principle. I am going to learn exactly what is expected of us, and then possibly as a one-man scoping and planning panel decide how we handle it at a meeting, or whether it goes directly to this meeting or not. So that's my report. Does anyone want to say anything? Councillor Keating wants to say something.
Thank you, Chair. I simply wanted to emphasise to yourselves that have not been in the development of the discussions that most of the changes proposed under the remit of the scrutiny are simply procedures that make the system work. And on that basis, I would expect and hope that you will endorse that. Thank you.
Before you speak, could I separate the changes with regard to call-in from the change in the remit? Because I think there might be different points of view on that. Emily.
I think what it sounds you've done with regards to the call-in sounds eminently sensible, and if it clarifies things, that's great. What I completely disagree with, and you'll know because I said last time, that I'm afraid I'm a cynic, and I'm always a bit distrusting of motives, that getting us to get bogged down in scrutinising the pre-budget is in order for us to end up being sent off into the Netherlands, wasting all our time doing something like that, because it'll get us absolutely nowhere and is relatively meaningless. And anyway, the budget will go forward as is, and to fill our books so that we don't spend time discussing things that we might like to discuss. And I therefore think it would be very commendable of you to say, well, thank you very much, but we've decided that there is no need for us to scrutinise the pre-budget because it won't get us anywhere.
Can I first get the filling the meeting? Is everybody content that the improvements to the call-in process should go ahead as I've said? Paul, do you want to speak on the budget issue?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking policy, then surely that's policy committees. If we're talking budget, specifically budget, then that's audit. If we're talking scrutiny of it, that's after the fact. So, I mean, Cabinet need to get the ducks in a row on what they want. It's their budget. It is the administration's budget that the rest of us then debate on the floor of full council in the normal manner. Pre-scrutiny, what would worry me is I don't want a cabinet leader standing up in the middle of full council saying, well, you've all had a chance to debate it and you've all agreed. No, we haven't, and nor are we likely to. So on that basis, if you want the political debate around this table, let's book a 4 or 5 hour meeting at the very least to go through the budget in every line, or audit does a proper job of just looking at the proper financial. I suspect Kevin's point, Chair, is he wants something in relation to his Section 151 responsibilities that relate to some pre-scrutiny that audit would have done otherwise.
I know Gavin can speak. Can I say that it was that he has those fiduciary responsibilities, plus the fact it was always the intention that led me to say what I've done. I think you'll have to trust me to make sure that we don't get cornered in the way you say. Yet to understand, Gavin.
I really agree with everyone else. I don't know how we can scrutinise something that doesn't actually exist, because it's not a decision until it's gone through full council. If someone moves an amendment at full council, would we then have to say, stop, we're going to hold a quick scrutiny meeting to go through to make sure it makes sense before we can go back into the council chamber and agree that it carries on? It could go on forever. I think budget has to follow its normal path. Someone does it through audit and accounts to make sure it makes sense and it's legal, and do that normal bit. Then it goes through a committee for the policy committee for contributions, then it goes to cabinet, then it goes to full council. I mean, I like the idea of practicing my budget speech in scrutiny and giving it a test run, but obviously I'd have to think of new jokes when it gets to the actual meeting, and that might be a challenge. I've not got a year to think of them, but I don't see what role we can possibly have on a draft.
I think perhaps he wants me to check his arithmetic. Well, I didn't sort of suggest that you make a decision on that. I've told you what I'm going to do and asked you to trust me not to get cornered, but I'll be reporting back on the work programme at our January meeting. No, I didn't say with regret. David.
I mean, it was only really to strengthen your position, if I may be so bold. I mean, none of us, I think, looking at across the table, would want that type of discussion within scrutiny in that sort of timescale. I mean, one thing you seek to steer us away from all the time is party political commentary on these things. Now, if you think you can have that discussion on the budget without it becoming party political, I mean, with respect, that wouldn't be possible, and nobody should imagine that. It would be a complete waste of time at that juncture.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, don't worry, I'm in agreement with all this. But unless we know precisely what aspects of the budget they require to be scrutinised, we go back to Kevin Janker's remit. But I think that remit is 151, wasn't it? Yeah, that rests with audit. It doesn't rest with this committee. But unless there's something we're all missing, but we leave it in your hands.
Can I say I wanted to get rid of all the financial reports here to audit, but I then did look in detail that, in fact, audit and governance does operate at a higher level, and of course it drives the audit team, who I think are always in need of member support. Which brings me neatly on to the next topic, because I think I know. On the review of the work programme, which is the next item on the agenda, I've moved on to. Tuesday, the 4th of November, you've seen. We go to the 20th of January, where we have a full agenda there, but we will, of course, have the performance panel report. We are coming back with commissioning, as we agreed when we had it before. I think a lot could happen between now and then, but it's on the agenda. And this committee insists that we get an update on partnership with Stagecoach, much as I wanted to leave it with Rob. Always a review of the work programme. Does anybody have any problem with that as our current intention for the January meeting? Okay, and then we come to March. Councillor Harvey. Oh, I was not looking that way.
Just quickly, I know we said at EPH with Councillor Miller in the chair in regard to cancelling the meeting in November, there was a conversation about trying to schedule an EPH in December on the basis of taking whatever the task and finish panel, if that was the direction of travel, to get it at least on an agenda this side of Christmas in terms of just either securing the direction of travel or a report back of work done thus far. You're not going to meet till January. January's already packed. March is packing up. It would be useful, I think, maybe to look to that December meeting at EPH, if we're acceptable here around this table, to pick up the housing issue again, just so it's not lost in the ether and disappears completely off of a committee agenda. It's on the task and finish panel's work programme, isn't it? We're going to away and do something. But it would be worth anchoring it to come back somewhere. If not, it's just an update to say this is what we've done and this is what's happening. And it's on an agenda and it's minuted, which it won't be in the task and finish panel.
I think people are getting to understand the concept of member-led, and as long as we keep a grip on that, it's not going to go wrong. David, again?
Sorry, Chair, it's only obliquely, I think, under the reference to commissioning. If we could just put on record, obviously, that the questionnaire has gone out to all and sundry, and I'd encourage any and all of you who have participated in the COG process to take part in that questionnaire. It wasn't without difficulty. I mean, I did think about having a holiday in Himalayas to see whether pushing a boulder uphill would be easier, but we got there in the end, sort of, and I do recommend that people take advantage of the questionnaire and complete it where it's appropriate. Those are people who've had experience of the COG process.
Can I ask you to thank Matthew Watson for his contribution? I think there's going to be a lot of things happening in the commissioning area between now and January, but we will certainly be meeting again to review as a scoping group, planning group, task and finish group, I don't care what, to continue. We will try and keep in better touch with you, Laura, so that we can meet with you.
Can I just say, I did submit some questions for it. I did email some, not to you, to somebody else, I can't remember who, but I did submit something.
And did it get included?
I don't think so.
Well, next meeting you'll have an opportunity to say something. Now, March, the thing I want to refer to in March, we haven't really got a major item in March, but I've reported before that there was an audit action for reviewable scrutiny functions, and I thought I knew what that meant, being a single sentence. We have had at our briefing meeting some examples of what other councils have done, and nowhere is it a review. It's a sort of brochure for scrutiny, I would say. That will come at that point, but clearly it's going to be for the I'm told it's changed its name to an annual report, but I have this audit action that was signed off on my behalf now to complete it by the end of March. I'm going to ask the auditor to let us slip that, because we've decided that it'll be a report until the end of March, and for us to review it on the 10th of March would be difficult. So therefore that item won't be on the 10th of March agenda, and we are looking for work almost at that time. Although I think that we've got so much follow-up for what we've already generated that we may not want another major item, Anneli.
Well, two things. I mean, we could do purposefully an audit as such of all of the agreed actions that have been agreed in the previous scrutiny meeting. So I think that's like a wash-up. So that could be a wash-up to check that the voluntary letter of undertakings have taken place in meetings, blah, blah, blah. But that's the first point I want to make. The second point was I misunderstood, obviously, that I thought Councillor Miller was offering to have your home, addressing the low-cost housing issue, meeting with the chosen few on the 13th of November at the meeting which he cancelled for EP8, which would seem like an eminently sensible date since everybody's had it in their diary for umpteen months, and it's free.
It's a detail I don't really want to talk about now. I have my diary here. Can I say that the people on my left are ahead of you because they are arranging a process for following up all actions from all committees, which will be extremely useful and helpful. People on the extreme left.
One of the other subjects that was raised when we did the original list, if my memory serves me right, is that since I've been elected councillor, we have been promised ad nauseum that the commercial property portfolio would be properly put on a computer system and managed accordingly. And every audit, because I've been in audit and governance for quite a number of years until this year, we have been assured that that target would be met the next year, and every year the previous target date disappeared, and it's still not on a register, and is still not going to be on a register. And we had a meeting which we discussed at performance panel last.
I was about to say, I seem to remember you bringing it up at the performance panel.
This is a very grave issue because we had a senior officer promise and undertake to us that it was underway, and now we've been told that it's not even started. So if we do want to scrutinise something and you're looking for work, I would suggest that would be a very deep mine of a scrutiny with a lot of veins to be found of an action that we've been promised for 7 years plus and has still not happened.
We have an extremely strong and powerful performance panel. I think we're all here, aren't we? And I suggest we leave it with them only. I was being a little bit facetious because we have got a list of items to be timetabled. I was sort of inviting you all to champion something, of which we have some to choose from here. Yes, I think we've agreed the work programme, and we're closing the meeting then.